There is a yellow family that has been living in the same house on Evergreen Terrace since 1989, and in all that time, not one of them has changed. The father still comes home from the same job. The mother still stands at the same kitchen counter. The kids still file into the same school building. And every Sunday night, the same couch catches the same bodies as the same television flickers to life, and the same theme song plays, and the same couch gag happens, and the same family sits in the same frame as they have always sat. For most people, The Simpsons is comfort food. It is familiar in the way that a childhood bedroom is familiar, a place you can return to and find exactly as you left it, no matter how much has changed outside the door. The colors are bright, the music is cheerful. The family bickers and makes up and causes disasters and recovers from them and laughs. And you laugh too. And the half hour ends and you feel warm. But if you slow down, if you sit very quietly with the lights off and let the details come to you instead of rushing toward them, something else begins to emerge from underneath the jokes and the bright colors and the familiar rhythms. Something stranger, something sadder, something that the show has been whispering about for 36 years without ever quite saying out loud. Every character in Springfield is carrying something. Every one of them arrived at the version of themselves you see on screen through a road that the show mostly keeps off camera. And when you follow those roads back, when you trace the damage to its source, and the silence to its origin, and the coping mechanism to the wound it was built to protect, what you find is a portrait of the American experience that is more honest than it has any right to be, coming from a cartoon about yellow people with 4 fingers. So settle in, get comfortable, let your shoulders drop and your breathing slow. We are going to spend a long time in Springfield tonight, not rushing through theories or chasing jump scares, just walking very slowly through the lives of these characters and asking the question the show has always been too polite to answer directly. What happened to these people? Let us start at the center of everything. Let us start with the man whose name is on the mailbox and whose limitations are the first thing Springfield established about itself. Section 1. Homer Simpson, the broken man who was made this way. There is a version of Homer Simpson that never existed. He is a little harder to picture than the Homer you know, not because his features are unfamiliar, but because the thing that makes him different is internal, and internal things are harder to imagine than visible ones. This other Homer has the same face, mostly. The same oversized frame, the same 5 o'clock shadow that is always 5 o'clock shadow, regardless of the actual time. The same tendency to fill whatever space he occupies with the specific kind of physical presence that says, this man has never really learned to modulate his existence around other people's comfort. But he is alert. When someone speaks to him, he listens. And then he responds with something that reflects an understanding of what was said, rather than a response to the last word he caught before his attention drifted. His eyes focus on things with genuine intention. He reads something and remembers it an hour later. He makes connections between events that happened at different times and understands at a deep structural level that one caused the other. He is, in the most fundamental sense, a man who knows what is happening in his own life. That version of Homer exists in exactly one episode, Season 12, an episode called HOMR, which is not a typo, but a consequence of the crayon. A doctor removes from Homer's nasal passage a yellow crayon that had been lodged there since Homer was a small child, pressing against the frontal lobe of his brain, physically reducing the cognitive capacity of a man who had been classified as having an IQ somewhere in the neighborhood of clinical impairment. And for the span of that episode, the real Homer comes forward. He solves an engineering problem that the plant's trained engineers had been unable to crack. He writes a letter to his daughter Lisa that is so emotionally precise and so clearly expressed that she weeps reading it. He understands his marriage in a way he had never been able to articulate before. He looks at Springfield and he sees it, really sees it, the way someone who has been handed a pair of glasses after a lifetime of blurry vision sees the world for the first time with the kind of clarity that is not entirely comfortable. And what he sees in Springfield, when he can finally see it clearly, is so unbearable that he asks to have the crayon put back. He chooses, deliberately, to return to the fog. He sits in the doctor's office, and he weighs the version of himself that is intelligent and aware and capable of understanding the architecture of his own suffering against the version of himself that cannot quite hold all of that together. And he chooses the version that cannot. He chooses to go back to sleep. This is the most honest moment in 36 years of Homer Simpson, and it is the moment from which everything else follows. Before we get to what that choice means, though, we need to sit with something more fundamental. We need to ask how the crayon got there in the first place. The show presents this as a background detail, a piece of comic setup that explains Homer's legendary stupidity without requiring the audience to spend too long on the mechanics. A young Homer put a crayon up his nose. Children do things like that. The crayon went further than it should have. It pressed against brain tissue. This explains everything, and we can all move on. Except we cannot actually move on. Because the detail that the show does not ask you to examine is the one that makes the crayon story genuinely disturbing rather than merely funny. This crayon traveled far enough into the nasal passage to make contact with the frontal lobe of a child's brain. This is not a crayon in the nostril in the way that toddlers sometimes put things in their nostrils. This is an object embedded in proximity to functioning brain tissue. And that child then went through his entire childhood, attended school for years, visited doctors in Springfield, lived an entire adult life inside the Springfield medical system, and not one single person, not a teacher who noticed his declining performance, not a school nurse doing a routine examination, not a pediatrician doing a checkup, not a doctor at any point in Homer's long medical history in Springfield found a foreign object pressing against the frontal lobe of his skull. There are two possible explanations for this. The first is that every single medical professional in Springfield is so comprehensively incompetent that they missed something detectable by a basic examination, possibly even a visible image. This is consistent with the general level of institutional failure in Springfield across most of its departments. But it requires us to believe that the failure is universal across every practitioner Homer ever encountered over several decades. The second possibility is that some of them found it, that at least one doctor at some point in Homer's medical history identified the presence of a foreign object in their patient's skull, and then looked at the name on the chart, and then looked at who owned the town and who employed the patient, and then said nothing. In a town where Burns's influence extends into the police department and the political infrastructure and the school system, the suggestion that it might also extend into the medical establishment is not paranoia. It is pattern recognition. And if the medical establishment in Springfield is aware of what the plant is doing to the population and has chosen not to act on that awareness, then Homer's crayon is not an accident. It is one more detail in a portrait of a man whose life was managed from a very early age toward a specific outcome. That outcome was useful to someone who needed him exactly as he was. Now let us look at Homer's father, because Abe Simpson is a significant figure in the architecture of Homer's damage, and the show tends to underplay this. Abraham Simpson is presented, in most episodes, as a comic figure. He is the rambling old man in the retirement home, the one who tells stories that begin in one place and end somewhere entirely different, the one whose relationship with current events and consistent narrative is loose at best. He is lovable in the specific way that the elderly are lovable, which is to say, in a way that the show uses to keep him at a safe comedic distance from the deeper question of what he was as a father. He was a bad one. Not maliciously, not with the specific intentional cruelty that Burns deployed, but with the thoughtlessness and the emotional unavailability and the self-absorption that produce, in the child on the receiving end, the same marks as more deliberate unkindness. Homer grew up without his father's approval in any form that registered as approval. He grew up in a household where the emotional temperature was managed by absence rather than presence, where love was assumed rather than expressed, where the gap between what Homer needed and what Abe provided was simply never addressed. And Abe told Homer his mother was dead. This is the act that organizes everything else. Mona Simpson, Homer's mother, was alive. She was in hiding, forced underground by Burns after she destroyed his biological weapons facility, but she was alive, and she was thinking about her son, and she was living with the weight of having left him without being able to explain why. Abe knew this. He showed Homer a grave that belonged to a poet, not to his wife, and he allowed his son to spend decades believing that his mother had died rather than left. The reasons Abe had for doing this were probably not entirely cynical. He may have believed it was protective. He may have decided that the truth was more complicated than Homer could handle. He may have simply been overwhelmed by his own grief and his own role in the situation, and taken the path that required the least explanation. But the consequence was that Homer grew up believing, at the most foundational level, that he was the kind of boy whose mother would rather be dead than stay with him. That belief did not produce a man with healthy attachment patterns. It produced a man who clings to the people he loves with the grip of someone who has been told, implicitly and early, that people leave. It produced a man who stays at a terrible job for decades because the job is the one thing in his life that has never fired him, that has a contractual obligation to keep him in place, and that Homer, being Homer, has somewhere along the way started to experience as a form of loyalty. Which brings us to the deal. There is a detail in the show's later seasons, easy to miss because it is revealed without ceremony in an episode that is handling several other things at the same time, which is that the reason Homer has never been permanently fired, the reason his employment at the plant has survived 742 documented errors and counting, is that Burns struck a deal with Grandpa Simpson. Burns had committed a crime. Abe had discovered the crime. In exchange for Abe's silence, Burns guaranteed Homer a job at the plant. Permanent employment. A safety net that would hold no matter what Homer did or failed to do inside the facility. Homer does not know about this deal. He has never known about it. He experienced his job security as a minor miracle, as evidence that he must be doing something right, even when all objective evidence suggested otherwise. He experienced it as a form of stability in a life that did not have much of it. He was grateful for it, and he was grateful to the man who had destroyed his family to get it. When Mona Simpson came back in season 7, Homer held her. He had his mother back. He learned the truth about her departure, about the activist cell and the biological weapons facility, and the moment when she helped a man she had just stolen from, and that man turned out to be Burns. He understood, for the duration of that episode, the shape of the conspiracy that had removed his mother from his childhood and kept her away for 27 years. And then Burns spotted her through a cab window and called the FBI, and she had to run again. And Homer went back to work on Monday. This is the piece of Homer's story that the show never quite manages to sit with for long enough. The man who signed Homer's paychecks was the man who took his mother. These two facts exist in Homer's memory simultaneously. The show established this. And then Homer continues, episode after episode, to go to work at the plant, to interact with Burns, to be unable to maintain the connection between the employer and the person who shaped his entire emotional life through a single act of retaliatory vindictiveness. The crayon helps explain this. The radiation helps explain this. The decades of neurological damage from proximity to a leaking reactor helps explain this. But there is something else operating here that is worth naming. Homer does not want to know. The HOMR episode shows us this directly. When Homer is intelligent, when he can hold the information clearly, the information is unbearable. The gap between what his life is and what it could have been becomes visible. The way Burns has used him becomes visible. The way Springfield has used the whole Simpson family becomes visible. And it is too much. It is more than Homer, even a cognitively functional Homer, can hold and continue to function. So he chose the fog. He chose it consciously, with full understanding of what he was choosing. He sat in the doctor's office and weighed clarity against comfort, and chose comfort, because in Springfield, comfort and clarity cannot coexist, and Homer has learned, somewhere very deep in himself, that clarity without the ability to change anything is just a more elaborate form of suffering. There is a scene in an episode called And Maggie Makes Three that is, in some ways, the most important scene in the entire run of the show. Homer explains to Bart and Lisa in a flashback why there are no photos of Maggie at his workstation at the plant. The explanation reveals that Homer has covered the portion of a plaque that reads, "Do not forget, you're here forever," with photos of Maggie, arranged so that the remaining letters spell instead, "Do it for her." That scene breaks people. It breaks them because it is the most compressed expression of what Homer actually is, underneath everything the show has done to him and everything he has done to himself. He is a man doing an unbearable thing every day because of something he loves enough to make the unbearable thing bearable. Not the job, not the paycheck, not even the stability of continued employment. Her, the baby in the photograph, the family that he holds on to with both hands in a house on a street in a town that has been slowly poisoning him since before he was born. The radiation theory, the contamination that the plant has been putting into the water and the air and the food supply, does something specific to Homer's body. It makes him indestructible in the physical sense and devastated in the cognitive sense. His body absorbs punishment that would kill any other person on the show. He falls off cliffs and stands back up. He is shot and heals. He is electrocuted and recovers. He is run over and survives. His pain tolerance is not normal, and his healing rate is not normal, and neither of these things is incidental to the environment he has been living inside for his entire life. But his mind. His mind is the price. The same exposure that armored his body has been eating at his cognitive function for decades, and the crayon that nobody removed was just the visible metaphor for an invisible process that had been happening from the day Homer was born in Springfield to two parents who had also been living in Springfield their entire lives. Homer is not stupid because Homer was always stupid. Homer is this way because a system needed him this way and built the conditions that would produce this way, and then it put him to work in the building that was producing those conditions, and then it made sure he could never be fired, and then it stood back. The show gives you all of this information. It gives it to you piece by piece over 36 seasons, never assembled in the same place, never stated in the same breath, because stating it in the same breath would make it undeniable. And Springfield has an arrangement with undeniable things. He comes home at 5:30, he falls onto the couch, he drinks his beer and he watches his television, and he laughs at things that are not always funny, and he loves his family with the enormous, clumsy love of a man who never learned a better way to do it. He does it for her. He does it for all of them. That is Homer Simpson. Not the joke. The man inside the joke, who was broken very early by forces too large for him to see clearly, even when they gave him the glasses, who chose comfort over clarity because the thing the clarity showed him was a world he was not equipped to fight, who works every day for the man who took his mother, and still cannot quite connect those two facts in a way that would change anything. He is the most American character in the history of American television. Not because Americans are funny, though they sometimes are, because America has a remarkable and heartbreaking capacity for absorbing enormous structural harm and converting it into a personality trait, and then laughing at the personality trait, and then going back to work on Monday. Homer laughs. He always laughs. Even when he says he does not understand why he is laughing. Rest with that for a moment before we move on. Drop a comment right now telling us what time it is where you are and what part of the world you are watching from. And if this kind of slow, deep exploration is the thing you want more of, subscribe so you are here for the next one. Section 2. Marge Simpson, the saint who swallowed everything. Marge Simpson's hair is a tower. It rises from the crown of her head in a column of blue that should, by any reasonable application of physics, have toppled sideways the first time she walked through a door with a low frame, or stood outside during a Springfield windstorm, or attempted to fit inside any car that was not specifically engineered around her. It has never toppled. It has never wavered. It has been there through fires and floods and the periodic destruction and reconstruction of the Simpson home and the various catastrophes that make up a normal Springfield week. And through all of it, the hair has remained exactly as it always was. Perfectly vertical, perfectly blue, utterly, defiantly unchanged. Most people who have watched the show have accepted this as stylistic shorthand. It is Marge's visual signature, the thing that makes her silhouette identifiable from any distance. The hair is just the hair. That is correct as far as it goes, but there is a detail embedded in the hair that becomes visible when you look at it not as a design choice, but as a behavioral pattern extended across 3.5 decades. Marge has been maintaining that exact tower for 36 years, not a different style that resembles the original, the same height, the same width, the same impossible vertical blue column. It does not change when the family loses their savings for the fifth time. It does not relax when the marriage is under strain. It does not respond to the accumulated weight of what it costs to hold a family like this one together in a town like this one for decade after decade. The hair stays up. The hair is Marge. Not just her appearance, but her project, her ongoing act of maintenance, the physical symbol of the internal work she performs continuously and silently and without any acknowledgement from almost anyone in her life. She holds the hair up, and she holds the family up, and she holds the household up, and she does all of it simultaneously, and the show frames this as her strength, which it is, and also occasionally acknowledges that strength has a cost, which it does, and then tends to drop the thread before that cost becomes the episode's actual subject. Marge was a Bouvier before she was a Simpson. This seems like a small biographical detail, and it is not. The Bouvier household was the kind of environment that teaches a certain kind of woman a certain kind of lesson about what women are for. Her mother, Jackie, is a woman for whom expressions of love tend to arrive as critiques. Her sisters, Patty and Selma, are women who have both, in different ways, responded to the Bouvier household's emotional atmosphere by building walls around themselves that are nearly impenetrable. Patty's wall is open hostility. Selma's is a slightly more accommodating version of the same fundamental strategy. Both of them learned that the way you manage your own feelings in a household that does not have good infrastructure for feelings is by managing the surface. You keep the surface presentable. You do not let the surface reveal what is happening underneath. You maintain the correct appearance of the correct emotions in the correct contexts, and you find private ways to handle everything that does not fit that frame. Marge learned this lesson and then carried it into a marriage and 3 children and 36 years of Springfield. The show gives Marge a rich internal life in the episodes that are paying attention, and then tends to use her as the straight woman in the episodes that are not. She is brilliant when the show needs her to be, and she has the evidence to prove it across multiple storylines. In Marge vs. the Monorail, which is officially an episode about Homer and a con man and a failing monorail, it is Marge who identifies the con. It is Marge who researches it, tracks down the expert who can expose it, assembles the information that would prevent the disaster, and then watches the disaster happen anyway because nobody listened to her in time. This is a pattern, not in one episode but across the series. Marge knows things. She identifies problems early. She locates the information that would change the outcome if anyone in the room was willing to stop and receive it. And the room keeps not stopping. Her response to being consistently right and consistently unheard is not to become louder. It is to become more patient, to absorb the gap between what she knows and what gets acted on, to convert her frustration into the motion of making something, or cleaning something, or fixing something, and to continue. The casseroles that Marge makes are the show's most sustained metaphor for this. They are dinner, yes, and they are presumably good dinner, but they are also Marge's internal weather in food form. When she is anxious, she cooks. When she is distressed, she bakes. When the feelings accumulate past the point where they can be held in the usual internal locations, they come out as something edible and nurturing and fundamentally productive that nobody in the family is required to respond to as an emotional communication because it is, technically, just dinner. She hums while she does it. She hums while she cooks, and while she drives, and while she waits for something difficult to be over. The hum is the thing that keeps the space inside her from going too quiet, the gentle sound she makes in the absence of anyone else asking the right question, which is a question nobody has ever asked Marge in 36 years. That question is, how are you? Not how are you in the social lubricant sense, the question that comes before the main topic and expects the answer, fine. How are you in the full sense? What is actually going on inside that tower of hair and behind those enormous eyes and underneath the patience that has been bending toward Homer and the children for 3 decades without showing any of the fatigue that 3 decades of that particular kind of bending should produce? Nobody asks. The family loves her, genuinely, and nobody asks. Homer loves Marge with a totality that is one of the show's most consistent emotional facts. This is not in question. But Homer's love for Marge is the love of someone who receives her as the most necessary fact of his existence, who would be disassembled without her, who clings to her with the specific intensity of a man who knows, at some cellular level, that without this person he would dissolve entirely. That is a real and in some ways beautiful love. It is also a love that centers itself rather than its object. When Homer loves Marge, he is also loving the security she provides him, the home she maintains, the family she holds together, the emotional regulation she performs for the household so that Homer does not have to regulate himself. The love is real, and the dependency is also real, and for Marge, the experience of being loved by Homer is the experience of being someone's primary support structure in a situation where the structure itself very rarely gets supported. The show has given Marge an interior that she reveals in brief windows. She paints, she writes, she finds causes and throws herself into them with an energy that suggests this is what she was always capable of and was simply never consistently given the space for. In these episodes, you see Marge as someone with a life that belongs to her, and she is very good at having that life for the duration of the episode. And then the episode ends. The painting gets stored. The cause winds down. The window closes, and Marge is back at the kitchen counter, making the eggs, keeping the hair up. There is a specific loneliness to this that the show acknowledges without dwelling on. Marge is surrounded at all times. She is in a busy household with a husband who needs her, and children who need her, and neighbors who need her, and a town that has learned to depend on her competence and her patience without ever formally recognizing either. She is, in the social sense, never alone. And she is, in the more important sense, frequently lonely. Because the loneliness that matters is not the absence of other people, it is the absence of someone who actually sees you. Someone who asks the right question. Someone who receives the answer and holds it, and stays. Her friendships in Springfield are thin. The show has depicted her attempting to build social connections outside the family, and most of those attempts have a sad arc that the show manages with enough comedy that you do not always feel the sadness until it has already passed. She finds someone who understands her, and then the plot closes the friendship. She joins a group, and for a moment, she has peers, adults who engage with her as herself, rather than as Homer's wife or the children's mother. And then the episode ends. The one friendship the show sustains over time is the one she has with herself, conducted mostly through the hum. Now consider what Marge's body might have absorbed. This is not something the show makes into a storyline, but it is a fact that the show deposited quietly in its history and never retrieved. Marge was briefly employed at the Springfield nuclear power plant. She worked there. She was inside the facility. She breathed the air that circulates through a building with 342 safety violations and luminous rats in the basement and plutonium being used as a paperweight on someone's desk. And then she left. And then she had 3 children. Bart and Lisa and Maggie were all born after Marge had been inside the plant. All 3 of them display the physical characteristics that no unaffected family of any ethnic background would display. The yellow skin, the overbite, the bulging eyes, the 4 fingers, the hair that does not follow normal physics even in the children, Bart's spikes that maintain their shape without product, Lisa's red starfish of a head that holds its form in rain and wind. The show does not connect these dots for you. It never says, this is what the plant did. But it also never provides any other explanation for why this family looks the way this family looks, and why outsiders, visitors, and guest characters from outside Springfield consistently look different in ways that map neatly onto the distinction between people who have been living inside the contamination zone and people who have not. Marge makes the eggs every morning in a town that has been slowly altering her biology and the biology of her children since before the children existed, and she does not know this. She cannot know it. The system that would tell her is the system that depends on her not knowing, and the people who would tell her are the people who cannot, because they are either too impaired to make the connection or too embedded in the structure that benefits from the connection remaining unmade. She makes the eggs. She hums. She keeps the hair exactly where it has always been. The resilience of Marge Simpson is real. It is genuinely remarkable. She is the person who keeps the Simpson family alive in the full sense of the word, not just biologically sustained, but emotionally coherent, connected to each other, capable of recognizing themselves as a family rather than just a collection of people sharing a house. But resilience without rest, sustained across 36 years, is not health. It is something more complicated and more costly. It is the thing you develop when you have decided that your job is to hold, and the alternative is that nothing gets held. Marge decided this a long time ago. She decided it in the Bouvier household, watching the women around her manage the gap between what they felt and what they were allowed to show. And she decided that if you were going to carry the household, you might as well carry it well. And she has been carrying it well ever since. The question the show never asks is what Marge puts down. In 36 years of television, we see what Marge carries. We see the breakfast and the clean clothes and the managed crises and the patience extended past any reasonable expectation of patience, and the love that continues to function even when the love is not being acknowledged or reciprocated at the speed at which it is being expended. What we do not see is what gets set aside to make room for all of that. What did Marge want to be before she decided she would be this? What does she want now, in the moments between the cooking and the worrying and the humming, when the house is briefly quiet and she is at the counter, and the question of what she wants is not yet drowned out by the question of what everyone else needs? The show gives glimpses. The painting returns. A cause catches her attention, and she pursues it with the focused energy of someone who has been waiting for an appropriate object for that focus. She is extraordinary in these moments. She has always been extraordinary. The extraordinary got redirected into the casseroles decades ago, and the casseroles are genuinely good casseroles, but they are not all that the extraordinary was capable of. She hums, and the hum is the sound of everything the extraordinary became in a life that needed it to be practical, channeled into a single note that fills the quiet kitchen and keeps the space inside her from going too honest. The hair stays up. Section 3. Bart Simpson, the rebel with no cause and every cause. Bart Simpson has been 10 years old for 36 years. In that time, he has accumulated a disciplinary record at Springfield Elementary that would, at any functional educational institution, have produced some form of intervention, some moment where an administrator sat down with the student and the family and said, "We need to have a different conversation about what is happening here." Instead, Bart has received detention. He has received suspension. He has had Principal Skinner standing in his general vicinity saying threatening things that are never quite threats and then retreating to his office to call his mother. And then the next episode begins, and Bart is still 10 years old and still in school and still in a state of low-grade insurgency against every authority structure that has ever tried to contain him. The skateboard cuts through Springfield traffic. The slingshot takes aim at the principal's car. The phone calls come in at Moe's asking for people named Amanda Hugginkiss and Alcoholic and Seymour Butts, and Moe reads these names aloud to the bar because Moe has been doing this for 36 years and has not yet developed the reflex to check the name before announcing it. And Bart is, on the surface, the most exuberant character the show has. He is the one who gets to go on adventures. He is the one whose antics drive the plots. He is the one who should, by the framing the show most often applies to him, be enjoying this. He is 10. He has no real responsibilities. He exists in a perpetual Saturday in which school is an obstacle rather than a destination, and the principal is an opponent rather than an authority, and the rules are things that happen to other people. But he is not quite as happy as the framing suggests he should be. The unhappiness is not dramatic. It does not arrive as a breakdown or a confession or a moment of visible despair. It arrives in the pauses between the skateboard runs. in the quiet moments that the show sometimes finds in the middle of Bart's storylines, where the exuberance stops and something more honest comes through. Something that looks, if you hold it long enough, like someone who is performing confidence rather than possessing it. Someone who made the decision very early to be the one who does not care, because the one who does not care cannot be hurt by the things that happen to people who do. And underneath the performance is the question of where the performance came from. Bart was labeled, not once, not in a single decisive moment, but continuously, across his entire school career, in the accumulating weight of low expectations applied consistently enough to become self-fulfilling. The Springfield elementary system looked at Bart Simpson and found him inconvenient, and inconvenient students in institutions that lack resources and imagination tend to receive a specific response, which is to be managed rather than educated. Principal Skinner manages Bart. He contains him. He applies punishments that serve the school's need to have Bart subdued, rather than the educational system's nominal purpose of developing Bart's capacities. The relationship between Skinner and Bart is not a pedagogical one, it is an administrative one, and within that administrative frame, Bart is a recurring problem to be handled, rather than a child to be known. This matters because of what Bart actually is. Bart is clever. This is not the cleverness of someone who performs well on academic tests, which requires a specific kind of sustained attention that Bart's circumstances have not produced. It is a different kind of intelligence, one that the school has no mechanism for recognizing and no incentive to develop. Social intelligence. The ability to read a room instantly, to assess what each person in it wants, to identify the leverage points in any given situation. The ability to move through a complex social environment with the fluency of someone who has had to learn that environment as a survival skill. These abilities are not small. In most human contexts throughout most of human history, the person who possessed them in abundance was not the one who failed. They were the one who navigated. The problem is that the context in which Bart is required to operate, an institution built around the specific and narrow form of intelligence that gets measured by standardized tests and rewarded by gold stars, is not a context that values what Bart has. So Bart has learned that what he has does not count. He has learned this from the grades, and the detentions, and the phone calls home, and the particular way that teachers and administrators and school systems treat children who do not fit neatly into the academic model. And he has responded to this lesson in the way that people respond when an institution decides what they are. He has performed it. He became the failure the system decided he was, and then he made the failure loud and creative and genuinely funny, because if you are going to be classified as a problem, you might as well be an interesting one. The skateboard through traffic is not self-destruction in the way it sometimes reads. It is exhibition. It is Bart saying, with his body, in the medium of movement and risk that the school has no jurisdiction over, that he is capable of things the classroom's evaluation system cannot see and does not look for. He is right about this. He is almost always right about this. The relationship with Milhouse is the show's most carefully observed friendship, and it reveals something about Bart that the skateboard and the phone calls are designed to keep hidden. Milhouse Van Houten is, by any social calculus in the Springfield elementary hierarchy, the wrong friend for Bart. He is the person who gets pushed down on the playground. He is the person who cries sometimes and is not ashamed of the crying. He is transparent about his needs in a way that the Springfield elementary social world punishes, and he does not have the resources to protect himself from that punishment. And Bart has been his best friend for 36 years. Not because Milhouse is useful, not because Milhouse brings something to the friendship that serves Bart's social standing. If anything, the friendship costs Bart socially. Choosing Milhouse is not a strategic choice. It is something closer to an honest one, and honesty is not a thing Bart gets to be in many places. With Milhouse, the performance comes down. Not completely, not in any single episode that makes this explicit, but in the accumulated texture of the relationship over time. Bart does not need to be the rebel around Milhouse. He does not need to be the person who does not care about anything. Milhouse already knows that Bart cares about things, because Bart keeps showing up, keeps choosing this friendship, keeps being there in the specific and unglamorous way that friendship actually operates, rather than the way it looks from outside. The Nelson dynamic is the mirror on the other side. Nelson Muntz is Bart's rebellion without Bart's safety net. Same insurgency. Same refusal of the school's framework. Same rejection of the institutions that have already decided who he is. But Nelson's version of all of this runs on a much thinner margin. Nelson does not have Marge at the kitchen counter. He does not have a Homer who will strangle hug him and ruin everything and love him through the ruining. Nelson has, by various accounts across the episodes that peek inside his home, essentially nothing. Bart sees this. Children understand the circumstances of other children in a direct and unmediated way that adults sometimes lose access to. He sees that Nelson is doing the same thing he is doing, but with no floor underneath it, and this registers as important information even though Bart cannot name what the information is or what to do with it. What Bart does with it is keep showing up near Nelson, too. In his own unacknowledged way, Bart functions as a witness to Nelson's circumstances. He does not save Nelson, or fix Nelson, or perform an act of charity that would embarrass both of them. He just stays close, in the loose way that boys who recognize each other stay close. And in some episodes, this presence has mattered in ways neither of them would ever describe. There is a tenderness underneath the chaos that the show protects carefully by surrounding it with enough comedy that it is never quite forced to be what it is. He defended Lisa before it cost him anything to do so, and also after it began to cost him things. He defended her in the specific way that boys who have decided they do not care about anything defend the people they actually care about, which is to say, sideways, with enough plausible deniability that nobody, including Bart, has to formally acknowledge that he cared. He protected her, and she is the only person in the family who he cannot entirely perform the not caring around. She knows what is in there. She knew before she had language for it. They have grown up in the same imperfect house, with the same Homer who strangled, and the same Marge who held it together, and the same Springfield that had already decided who both of them were before either of them could offer a competing interpretation. The strangling. Let us sit with this for a moment, because the show's longest-running physical gag is also, if you let it be, one of the show's most telling characterizations of what Homer is and what Homer has passed on. Homer grabs Bart by the throat when he is frustrated. He does this reflexively, in the specific, automatic way that people do things they learned before they could articulate what they were learning. He does it, and then the scene moves on because the show has established it as comedy, and comedy moves. But what it is, underneath the comedy, is a communication. And the communication is that in this household, love and aggression share a room. That the person who would do anything for you is also the person who grabs you when the frustration exceeds the ability to manage it. That warmth and harm can coexist in the same person and the same relationship, and that this is, in the Simpson household, just how things are. Bart received this communication from a very young age. He received it alongside all the other information the household provides, the enormous love and the spectacular incompetence, and the commitment to the family that Homer expresses through failing at it. And he incorporated it into his understanding of how people who love each other treat each other. He does not strangle anyone. That is not where the pattern landed in him. But the pattern is there, transformed into something else. It lives in the way Bart calibrates his relationships, in the specific distance he maintains between himself and vulnerability, in the performance of not caring that is doing a lot of work protecting something real that he would not know how to protect any other way. He will be 10 years old forever. The show will never let him grow up. And in the logic of the show, this is fine. This is just how cartoons work. But if you let yourself think about what it means for a child to be frozen at the moment of maximum potential and minimum protection, at the age when everything is still possible and nothing is yet secured, at the age when the adult you will become is still entirely in motion and could still go in any direction, and then you freeze that child there forever. It is either the kindest thing the show could do, or the saddest. Maybe both. The skateboard cuts through the traffic. The slingshot takes aim. The phone rings at Moe's, and somewhere in the space between the prank and the pause, a 10-year-old boy who is brilliant in a way his school will never recognize, and loyal in a way he will never admit, and hurt in a way he has built an entire personality to keep hidden, keeps moving through Springfield at the speed of someone who has decided that stopping is more dangerous than not stopping. He keeps moving. He always will. Section 4. Lisa Simpson, the prophet nobody listens to. Lisa Simpson plays the saxophone. She plays it late at night in her room, after the rest of the house has gone quiet and the sounds of Homer's various misadventures have settled into the particular silence of a home that runs on managed chaos. She plays it when she needs to think, when the thing she needs to think about is too large for words and requires a different medium. She plays it outside sometimes, on the front steps of the house, into the open Springfield air, and almost nobody ever hears her. That is the central fact of the saxophone, not the playing, which is extraordinary by any reasonable standard of assessment, the playing into a largely indifferent world, the producing of something beautiful for an audience that is mostly elsewhere, and the doing of this anyway, every time, with an earnestness that the Springfield social world has not been able to extinguish, despite trying in various ways for Lisa's entire life. Lisa Simpson is 8 years old, and she is the only person in Springfield who is paying full attention. Full attention, in Springfield, is an act of continuous and possibly foolhardy courage, because paying full attention to Springfield means seeing things that are not comfortable to see. The three-eyed fish, and the cracked cooling towers, and the yellow skin, and the four-finger hands, and the way the town resets between catastrophes, and the way the same man has owned the same institution for over a century, and the way nobody ever seems to get around to asking why. Paying full attention means asking questions that the room does not want asked, and then living in the room with the unasked questions, and then asking again tomorrow. This is Lisa's life. Where did this come from? The show does not give a single satisfying answer, but it gives pieces. Her intelligence is not the result of any environmental advantage. Springfield Elementary has not nourished it. The school, in various ways across various episodes, has been actively inhospitable to the kind of mind Lisa has, in the specific way that institutions built around narrow models of performance tend to be inhospitable to minds that do not fit the model. Springfield Elementary rewards the quiet and the compliant. It rewards the performance of knowing things when asked by teachers who have the answers already. It gives gold stars for behavior that the institution needs students to perform, and it calls this education. And it does this without any apparent awareness that the student sitting in the second row, who has been raising her hand for the entire period, with an answer that is more sophisticated than the question, might need something the gold star is not capable of providing. Lisa has received gold stars. She has received academic honors and musical awards and recognition for excellence in the activities the school's framework is able to see and measure. None of this has given her what she actually needs. What she actually needs arrived, once, in the form of a substitute teacher named Mr. Bergstrom. He is in exactly one episode. He appears, he sees Lisa, he gives her what she needs, and then he leaves. The episode is carefully structured around this arc, which is also the arc of many things in Lisa's experience. Something arrives that is exactly right. It sees her and names what it sees. And then it is gone. Mr. Bergstrom saw Lisa, not the academic record, not the hand raised in class, the person raising the hand. The 8-year-old who needed someone to tell her, with the specific authority of someone who clearly meant it, that her kind of mind was not a burden to be managed by the people around her, but something worth developing for its own sake, in the direction it wanted to go, regardless of whether that direction made the room more comfortable. He told her this. And then he left Springfield, because Springfield is not a place where people like Mr. Bergstrom tend to stay for very long. And Lisa wept, and the show moved on. This is her relationship with the things that could sustain her. They appear briefly, and then they leave. The friend who understood her at a particular age moves away. The community that briefly embraced her rejects her when she pushes past the point where her questioning becomes uncomfortable. The teacher leaves, the brief alliance dissolves, and Lisa is returned to herself, in her room, with the saxophone, playing into the Springfield night. Her relationship with Homer is one of the show's most carefully tended emotional threads. Homer loves Lisa with the totality and the bewilderment of someone in the presence of something he cannot fully comprehend but cannot stop feeling moved by. He knows she is extraordinary. He knows this in the way that parents sometimes know things about their children that they cannot articulate, because the knowing operates at a level that language is slightly too blunt to reach. He feels it in his chest when she plays. He feels it when she speaks about things he does not understand. He feels it in the particular mixture of pride and inadequacy that parents of extraordinary children sometimes feel. The pride enormous, and the inadequacy sitting alongside it, unannounced, keeping its own counsel. He cannot follow her where her mind goes. She has known this for a long time. She has spent her entire childhood calibrating the version of herself that she brings into conversations with Homer against the ceiling of those conversations, keeping the full complexity of what she is thinking slightly below the level where it would require Homer to acknowledge that he is lost. She does this out of love. She does it carefully and without drawing attention to the fact that she is doing it. And it costs her something, this continuous editing of herself, this management of her own presence for her father's comfort. It costs her something she does not have an enormous surplus of, which is the feeling of being fully known. Marge understands her better. Marge has a different kind of intelligence than Homer, one that operates more quietly and pays more careful attention to what people are actually doing as opposed to what they are saying they are doing. Marge sees Lisa, but Marge's response to seeing clearly is to manage what she sees, and Lisa's response is to say it out loud. And these two responses are sometimes in productive tension and sometimes in conflict. The vegetarianism episode, the anti-hunting episode, the episode about the environment, and the episode about education, and the episode about the school's treatment of girls in competitive contexts, and the episode about the history that is not being taught. Lisa raises her hand on all of these, and the hand stays raised, and the room moves on around the raised hand. This is not defeatism in Lisa. She does not stop raising it. The hand goes back up. The question gets asked again from a slightly different angle. She persists in the way that people persist who have decided that the alternative to asking the question is complicity in the silence that surrounds it. And Lisa has made it very clear across 36 seasons that she would rather be the uncomfortable presence than the comfortable absence. The saxophone is where this lives most honestly. Jazz is complicated. It does not resolve the way that most music the Springfield population prefers resolves. It does not go where you expect it to go, and when it arrives somewhere you did not expect, it requires you to adjust, rather than requiring the music to come back to where you were comfortable. This is also Lisa. She goes where the evidence points, even when it points somewhere nobody in the room is prepared to follow. She adjusts her position when she learns something new, which, in a town that maintains a social contract around not learning anything new, reads as inconsistency. She believes things that require other people to believe them alongside her, and other people in Springfield mostly cannot, because believing them would require looking at what Springfield is, and Springfield has a collective arrangement about not looking too hard. The flash forward in Lisa's wedding gives us a version of her future that the show spent enough time building to make it feel real rather than hypothetical. She is in her mid-20s, educated, principled, engaged to a decent person who loves her, living somewhere that is not Springfield. She has become the person the 8-year-old version of her was going to become. She is also, in the specific and irreducible way of people who grew up in complicated families and complicated towns, still fully tethered to the place and the people she came from. She comes back for the episode. She cancels the wedding. She chooses the family over the future the family was always pushing her toward. The show presents this as love winning. And love is winning. That is not dishonest. But it is also the gravitational pull of origin. The way that even the person most clearly built for somewhere else is kept in the orbit of where they started. Not by chains, but by the particular weight of all the things that were formative. Lisa will leave Springfield eventually. Every future the show has imagined for her, every flash forward and imagined timeline, places her somewhere that is not Springfield, as someone who is not primarily defined by her hometown. The adult Lisa is herself in a larger container, and the container is no longer yellow. But she carries Springfield. She will carry it the way you carry any place that made you, which is not as luggage, but as the thing underneath the luggage, the thing that shaped the shape of you before you were old enough to choose your own shape. She carries Homer and Marge and the house on Evergreen Terrace, and the saxophone and the raised hand, and the questions nobody answered, and the substitute teacher who left, and the brother who defended her without admitting it, and the baby sister who sees everything and says nothing, and the town that made her who she is by being exactly what it is. She plays the saxophone into the Springfield night. Somewhere in the dark, something might be listening. Section 5. Maggie Simpson, the most dangerous person in Springfield. In 36 years, Maggie Simpson has said one word: Daddy. Voiced by Elizabeth Taylor in what the show treated as an event, delivered at the end of an episode that built to it with the careful timing and earned emotional weight of something the writers wanted you to feel the full force of, and then never repeated. One word across 36 years of television. One word from a character who is present in almost every episode, who is in the room for almost every significant family moment, who sits in her high chair or is carried in someone's arms during the conversations that define what the Simpson family is and what it is going through. One word, and then silence. Lasting, deliberate, unbroken silence from a character whose silence is the most interesting thing about her. The theories about Maggie tend to organize themselves around her intelligence, around the accumulated evidence that suggests she is the most cognitively capable member of a family where capability is unevenly distributed. The daycare short film in which she outmaneuvers an authoritarian institution and several adult-sized problems using only her infant's body, and the considerable processing power of whatever is happening behind her enormous eyes. The testing results, glimpsed in various episodes, that suggest her intelligence exceeds what the available instruments can measure. The problem-solving she demonstrates in situations that would stump adults who have the full use of their developed motor skills and vocabulary. All of this is real, and all of it matters, and we will get to it in detail. But the intelligence is not the most interesting thing about Maggie. The most interesting thing about Maggie is the choice. Because Maggie is not mute. The show has been meticulous about establishing this. She produces sounds. She responds to her name with the appropriate behavior of someone who recognized it. She tracks language being spoken around her and responds to the specific emotional tones within that language with the calibrated reactions of someone who understands not just the words, but the meanings underneath the words. She demonstrated in the Elizabeth Taylor episode that the capacity for speech is there. The word came out. The word was clear and intentional and directed and unmistakably the right word for the moment. She chose to say it. She has chosen not to say anything since. This is a 1-year-old making a strategic communication decision and then sustaining that decision across 36 years of continuous existence within a household that provides, between its 4 other members, an essentially non-stop supply of words. Homer never stops talking. Marge hums and worries aloud. Bart mouths off continuously. Lisa lectures and argues and plays and narrates her own consciousness at a rate that would be impressive in an adult. And in the middle of this wall of family noise, Maggie sits in her high chair in her corner and processes it all behind the largest eyes in Springfield and says nothing. A child who was not choosing this would have spoken by now. A child whose silence was developmental rather than strategic would have broken it, in the specific way that toddlers break silences, with something unexpected and early and imperfectly formed. Maggie has not broken it in 36 years. She has maintained it with a consistency that, in a human context, we would call discipline. What is she watching while she watches? She is watching the family. She is watching Homer come home from the plant and fall onto the couch and drink his beer and occasionally cause a disaster, and more occasionally demonstrate the enormous and clumsy love that is his primary mode of parental engagement. She is watching Marge absorb and maintain and hum and keep the hair up. She is watching Bart perform the rebellion that protects the thing he cannot let be seen. She is watching Lisa raise her hand into a room that mostly ignores it. She is watching the outcome of intelligence expressed visibly in this household and in this town, and she is running a calculation. The calculation is not a simple one. It is not just, I should be quiet so nobody notices me. It is something more sophisticated than that, something that requires a long view and a specific kind of patience and an understanding of how institutional and social systems respond to different kinds of capability. Look at Lisa. Lisa is brilliant. Lisa expresses the brilliance. Lisa raises the hand and argues the case and challenges the position and demands the better explanation and takes the stand on the principle, even when the principle is going to cost her something social or familial. And the town dismisses her. The school rewards her with gold stars while ignoring what she is actually saying. The family loves her in the specific way that people love someone whose frequency they cannot quite tune to. Lisa is brilliant and visible, and the visibility produces mostly resistance. Maggie has watched this happen for her entire life. She was there for the vegetarianism argument. She was in the room for every dinner table debate Lisa lost to the family's collective inability or unwillingness to follow the logic. She was in the high chair for the moments when Lisa's intelligence encountered the ceiling of what Springfield could absorb, and pressed against it and was pushed back. She watched. She calculated. She reached a conclusion. The conclusion is, intelligence that is visible gets suppressed. Capability that is announced gets managed. The person who raises their hand gets the gold star and the dismissal. The person who does not raise their hand does not get the gold star, but also does not get the dismissal, which means the person who does not raise their hand is, in a specific and important way, more free. Maggie chose freedom over recognition. She put the pacifier in her mouth, and she looked out from behind her enormous eyes, and she decided that the most powerful position available to her in this household and in this town was the position that nobody was watching carefully enough to see. Now let us look at what she has done from that position. She shot Mr. Burns. Whether or not the shooting was intentional is genuinely unresolved by the available evidence, and we explored this question earlier in a different context, but what is not unresolved is the aftermath. The final shot of the Who Shot Mr. Burns episode places Maggie alone in the room after everyone has left. She checks the room. She confirms she is unobserved. And then she moves her pacifier in the specific motion that mimics pulling a trigger. A baby who did not understand what had happened would not scan the room first. A baby who was randomly moving her mouth would not do so only after confirming the absence of observers. The scan is the tell. The scan says, I know what this gesture means in the context of what happened, and I know that performing it is something that would be significant to anyone who saw it, and I am choosing to perform it only when no one can see it. This requires several things. It requires a memory of the event precise enough to replay the physical motion of it. It requires an understanding that the motion is meaningful, that it is associated with consequences, that those consequences apply to the person who performed the original motion. It requires a theory of other people's minds sophisticated enough to model what another person would do if they saw this, and it requires enough impulse control to wait until the room is empty before doing it. These are not the capacities of an infant. These are the capacities of a thinking person who has decided that the optimal strategy for managing what she knows is to manage it privately. The daycare film, The Longest Daycare, runs for 7 minutes and is the most complete portrait of Maggie's intelligence that the show has produced. In those 7 minutes, she demonstrates spatial reasoning, threat assessment, strategic planning, tactical adaptation when plans fail, coalition building with other infants, and the ability to execute a multi-part plan under time pressure with limited physical capacity. Her body is the bottleneck. Her motor skills are genuinely those of a 1-year-old. She falls when she runs. She crawls when she should walk. She cannot reach things her mind has already identified as resources because her arms are not long enough yet. She works around every physical limitation with a creative problem-solving that the show depicts without commentary, as though it is simply what happens when Maggie encounters an obstacle. It is not what happens when most one-year-olds encounter obstacles. Most one-year-olds cry. Most one-year-olds look for the nearest adult. Most one-year-olds have not yet developed the cognitive architecture required to assess a problem, generate a solution, test the solution, discard it when it fails, generate a new solution, and execute it before the threat gets worse. Maggie does all of this routinely. The daycare film just happens to put it on screen for 7 uninterrupted minutes instead of burying it in the background of a family-centered episode. Now consider what Maggie knows. She has been in every room. She has been carried through every significant family conversation because babies are carried, and carrying a baby into a room is not the same as bringing a witness into the room, at least not in the way that the people carrying her tend to think about it. She was there when the family learned about Mona Simpson. She was there during the various financial crises and the marriage stresses, and the moments when the family came close to structural failure before Marge held it together. She was there when Homer got the crayon out, and when the smart Homer sat in the kitchen, and when the smart Homer made the choice to put it back. She has the context. She has the memory to store the context. She has the intelligence to synthesize it into something coherent. She knows about Burns. She knows about the plant. She knows, in the way that someone who has been in all the rooms and processed all the conversations knows things, what the architecture of her family's circumstances looks like. She knows who made it this way, and she knows that nobody in her family has the combination of capability and freedom from consequences required to do anything with that knowledge. Homer cannot. Marge cannot without destroying the structure she maintains. Bart does not yet have the framework. Lisa has the framework, but not the strategy of invisibility required to use it effectively in a place like Springfield. Maggie has both. She has the framework Lisa has. She has been absorbing it from Lisa for her entire life. And she has the strategic invisibility that she built herself, from the lesson of watching what visibility costs in this town. The most dangerous person in Springfield is not Burns, who is powerful but visible, and who has enemies who track him because his power is visible. The most dangerous person in Springfield is the 1-year-old in the high chair, who has spent 36 years watching and remembering and calculating and waiting. She shot the richest man in town and was acquitted, because no jury in the world would convict a baby. She looked around the empty room and made sure she was alone. She moved the pacifier, and then she went back to waiting. Section 6. Mr. The oldest monster in America. Charles Montgomery Burns was born in the 19th century. The exact year shifts depending on which episode you are watching. The show has never pinned this down definitively, possibly because pinning it down would force a reckoning with the mathematics of his survival that the comedy framing cannot quite accommodate. Every version of his timeline places his birth somewhere in the late 1800s. Every version of his present places him in a functioning office, running a corporation, executing schemes that require sustained cognitive effort and sophisticated long-term planning, while his body does what bodies do at ages that are, by any reasonable biological standard, several decades past the point where sustained cognitive effort should be possible. He is old. He is impossibly, irreducibly, fundamentally old. Old in a way that has changed him at a cellular level. Old in a way that makes the man beneath the wealth and the schemes and the manipulations visible in certain angles and certain lights. Not as fragility, but as something that has been preserved past its intended lifespan through the specific kind of intervention that only extreme wealth makes possible. He glows. This is not a metaphor for his wealth or his power. It is a literal physical fact established by the show in the episode called The Springfield Files. After his weekly medical treatment, a regimen so intensive and so chemically complex that the show describes it as producing a visible green luminescence from Burns's body, he wanders from the medical facility in a state of such complete saturation that he emits visible light. People encounter him in the woods near Springfield at night and cannot process what they are seeing because the framework that Springfield residents have available for understanding their world does not include the category glowing person who should by rights be dead. So they call him an alien. Because an alien from outer space is, within the Springfield worldview, more plausible than the correct explanation, which is that the man who owns the nuclear power plant is so thoroughly irradiated, so fundamentally altered at the biological level by decades of proximity to radioactive material and weekly administration of what amounts to controlled nuclear therapy, that his body has decoupled from normal cellular function and now requires external maintenance to continue operating. The treatment keeps him alive for exactly 1 week. Miss a dose, and Burns dies. This is not ambiguous. The show states it. The tolerance for deviation is 0. His life is maintained the way you maintain equipment, through scheduled servicing, through the regular application of the specific input that keeps the system running. The fuel is radiation. The billionaire who profits from exposing an entire town to radioactive byproducts is personally dependent on controlled radioactive exposure to sustain his own body. He is not separate from the process that is poisoning Springfield. He is the most extreme expression of it, and he knows this. Burns's understanding of radiation is not theoretical. It is immediate and personal and embedded in his weekly schedule and his medical infrastructure and the careful management of his own biological systems that Smithers performs alongside the management of everything else Burns requires. He knows what radiation does to biological tissue, because radiation is what keeps his own biological tissue functioning. He is the proof of concept, the most extreme example, the long-term outcome of sustained exposure, managed with resources that nobody else in Springfield has access to. He looks at Springfield, and he sees what he is, extended across an entire population, without the resources to manage it. He sees the three-eyed fish, and the luminous rats, and the children with the yellow skin, and the 4 fingers, and the body chemistry of a population that has been slowly altered by his facility's output for decades, and he does nothing about it. Because doing something about it would mean changing the facility, and changing the facility would mean acknowledging what the facility has been doing, and acknowledging it would mean someone might start calculating what the damage has been worth, and who owes the damaged community what. Burns has run this calculation. He has been running it since before most of the people in Springfield were born. The answer, from his perspective, is that the facility stays as it is. The violations continue. Homer Simpson stays in Sector 7G. The water stays as it is. The population stays as it is. And Burns continues. There is a scene the show has given us of Burns as a young child, separated from his grandfather, the one figure who offered him genuine warmth, and sent to live with a cruel surrogate family. This scene is played quickly and mostly for comedy, but it contains the single most important fact about how Burns became Burns. He was capable of love. He was capable of being loved. The small boy in that scene has not yet become the man who would spend a century treating other people as instruments. He is still open. And then the scene ends, and the next time we see Burns, he is the oldest monster in America. Whatever closed the small boy is not something the show spends time on, but the pattern of what closed it is visible in the structure of Burns's relationships throughout the series. He does not form attachments in the way that people who learned early that attachment is safe tend to form them. His relationship with Smithers, which is the closest thing he has to a genuine connection, operates through dependency rather than mutuality. Smithers needs Burns. Burns needs Smithers's management of his treatment schedule and his logistics. They orbit each other through a gravity that is entirely structural, and yet, in certain episodes, in moments where the structure briefly becomes background, something more human occasionally shows through. Burns is occasionally capable of what looks like warmth towards Smithers. He is occasionally capable of something that functions like regret. In the episode where he encounters the teddy bear from his childhood, the one his grandfather gave him, he is capable of weeping. The capacity is there. It is just very rarely given permission to operate, because operating on the basis of feeling rather than calculation is not how Burns has survived a century in Springfield. He survived by calculating, by always knowing what something is worth before anyone else in the room does. by being willing to act on that knowledge without the friction of moral hesitation, by building a system around his own continuation so thoroughly that the system now runs itself, self-maintaining, self-reinforcing, designed to ensure that nothing and no one in Springfield ever reaches the leverage point that would allow them to change it. The system worked. Burns is still in the chair. The fingers are still steepled. The eyes are still narrowed to the specific degree that suggests he is calculating something enormous and private and entirely to his own benefit. He has been in that chair for longer than most American institutions have existed. He will be there when the next generation of Springfield residents is born, if Springfield still produces residents in the conventional sense, which is not entirely clear given what the water has been doing for the past several decades. He will be there because he is too expensive to die, because the machine that keeps him running also keeps the lights on in Springfield, and Springfield cannot afford to lose the lights, and the lights cannot run without the plant, and the plant cannot run without Burns, and Burns cannot live without the plant. The loop is sealed. It has always been sealed. It was sealed on the day the plant opened, and it will remain sealed for as long as the radiation keeps the disease equilibrium balanced and the treatment schedule holds, and Smithers manages the calendar, and Homer fails to connect the fact on his left to the fact on his right. Three Stooges syndrome, the doctor called it. Every disease Burns carries, blocking every other disease from progressing. A biological gridlock, where everything that should kill him is being held in check by everything else that should kill him. It is not funny. It is the most specific description of a man who has been kept alive past all natural limits by the very thing that is destroying everyone around him. Burns is the concentrated expression of what exposure to the plant produces at the extreme end of the spectrum, with resources available to manage it. He is what Springfield is doing to itself. If Springfield could be condensed into a single person, made rich enough to survive what would otherwise kill him, and given enough time to watch the process play out in everyone else. He watches it. He has always watched it. He will keep watching it until the treatment schedule finally fails. He holds very still behind his enormous desk. The fingers are still steepled. The calculation continues. Section 7. Ned Flanders, the good man who was never allowed to break. Ned Flanders is the best person in Springfield. This is not a competitive assessment or a relative judgment. It is not that Ned is better than Homer specifically, or more principled than Krusty, or less corruptible than Wiggum. It is a statement about Ned in absolute terms. By any moral framework that a functioning society would recognize as legitimate, Ned Flanders is measurably, continuously, empirically better than almost every other resident of this town. He is generous without the audience. When nobody is watching, when the generosity cannot be converted into social capital, when the giving costs him something real and produces nothing in return except the fact of having given, Ned gives. He gives Homer equipment. He gives the town time. He gives his sons an upbringing built on patience and consistency, even when consistency is the hardest possible response to what the day has produced. He is honest. He is kind. He maintains his faith across conditions that would have eroded anyone else's faith long before the conditions reached what Springfield has put Ned through. And Springfield has taken nearly everything from him. Maud Flanders died at a racetrack. She did not die of illness or of the kind of accident that happens without a human agent. She died because Homer Simpson was in the stands avoiding incoming t-shirts, and the physics of his avoidance directed the projectiles toward Maud, and the kinetic impact was sufficient to knock her from the bleachers. Maud Flanders died as a direct consequence of Homer Simpson's selfishness expressed in a single reflexive moment. A moment where Homer prioritized his own comfort over his awareness of what his movement was doing to the space around him. And Ned forgave him. Not immediately. There was grief, genuine and total, that the show depicted with enough weight that even casual viewers noticed the show was doing something different with this storyline than it usually did with its consequential moments. Ned grieved Maud in the way that someone who loved their spouse with genuine depth and genuine specificity grieves. And then he forgave Homer, because that is what Ned does. The show presents this as spiritual virtue. In the vocabulary the show uses for Ned, Forgiveness is the expression of faith, the practical application of the beliefs he holds. He forgives because he believes in forgiveness. He turns the other cheek because the other cheek is what his faith asks of him. This is true, and it is also incomplete. The show told us, in a later episode, why Ned cannot sustain anger. It is not entirely, or perhaps not primarily, spiritual. Ned was a violent and uncontrollable child, his parents being philosophically opposed to discipline in the specific way that a certain kind of 1960s parent was, took him to a psychiatrist at the age of 6. That psychiatrist spent years conditioning the violence and the anger and the capacity for sustained negative emotion out of Ned through a form of behavioral therapy so intensive that it did not just modify the behavior, but restructured the emotional architecture behind the behavior. Ned's kindness is the scar tissue. The patience is the shell left when the thing inside was removed. The forgiveness is the only available response for a man who was conditioned before he was old enough to consent to the conditioning to not have access to the emotional states that produce sustained anger or sustained confrontation, or the kind of righteous fury that a person in Ned's circumstances would be entirely entitled to feel. The faith that he built on top of the conditioning is real. This is important. The show does not suggest that Ned's faith is false or performed. He believes what he says he believes. He prays with genuine intention. He goes to church because he wants to be there, not because the conditioning requires it. But the faith is built on a foundation that was shaped by conditioning rather than choice. And this means that the expression of the faith, the forgiveness and the patience and the turning of the other cheek, while genuinely motivated, is also structurally unable to not be those things. Ned cannot be angry at Homer, not just because he has chosen forgiveness, because the tool he would need to sustain the anger with was removed before he knew it could be kept. God talks to Homer. This is the detail that the show has placed at the center of Ned's story, and that it deploys with the casualness of something it does not fully want you to notice. Homer, who sleeps through church with the untroubled conscience of a man who does not experience his absence as meaningful, who approaches his faith the way he approaches most things that are not donuts, as something available when convenient and otherwise ignorable, has had direct conversational encounters with the divine. More than once, face to face, confirmed, God talking to Homer and Homer talking back. And Ned, who has organized the entire architecture of his life around his faith, who prays and studies and tends and serves and forgives and forgives and forgives, has received from that same divine presence a silence so complete that it is its own kind of statement. The drunk gets the conversation. The devout man gets silence. Within the show's own universe, God is confirmed to exist. This is not ambiguous. So the silence God keeps toward Ned is not the silence of someone who is not there. It is the silence of someone who is there and choosing not to speak. And the question that this raises, the one the show places in the center of Ned's narrative, and then mostly declines to answer, is why? The darkest reading is that the show is being honest about something it usually does not say directly. Merit is not the currency that matters in Springfield. Goodness is not what the town systems reward. The systems reward compliance and utility, and Ned's goodness is useful to the community in the way that a reliable resource is useful, without being the same thing as being valued. Springfield needs Ned to be what he is. It needs him to lend Homer the equipment, to maintain the fence between the houses, to be the pleasant face of the neighborhood that says, yes, this is a community. People are decent here. The social contract is functioning. Ned's goodness is part of the town's self-image, and it costs the town nothing because Ned absorbs every cost himself. But the things that Ned needs, the thing that Ned lost when Maud died, the recognition that his faith might be answered rather than merely tested, the sign that the effort means something beyond the carrying of it, these things Springfield does not provide. And God, who talks to Homer apparently at will, does not provide them either. What you do with this depends on what you believe about the show's universe and its relationship to justice. The show is not always consistent about whether justice operates in Springfield or not. Sometimes Homer's selfishness produces consequences that feel morally appropriate. Sometimes it produces nothing at all, and Ned absorbs it and forgives, and the credits roll. The hurricane episode is the exception that makes the rule visible. When Ned breaks, the person underneath all the conditioning comes out, and what that person says is accurate. Every frustration he names is real. Every complaint is legitimate. The speech he gives to the town is not the speech of a broken man saying irrational things. It is the speech of a man who has been holding the irrational things everyone else has been doing to him for 30 years and who has finally run out of room. And the town responds by sending him to a mental health facility. The truth, when it comes out of Ned Flanders, is classified as a breakdown. He returns from the facility restored. The diddly-doodlies resume. The patience returns. Homer learns a lesson and then forgets it by the next episode. The fence between the houses is intact. The neighborhood is decent again. The social contract is functioning. And Ned goes back to being the best person in Springfield, in the way that the best person in a town like Springfield goes back to being the best person in a town like Springfield. Which is to say, without adequate recognition, without adequate protection, and without the thing his faith has been waiting for, he marries again, eventually. He finds something. The show does not leave him entirely in the dark, but it also does not give him the thing at the center of his absence, which is an answer. He keeps going without the answer. He keeps being good. He keeps forgiving. The conditioning holds. Section 8. Moe Cieslak, the bartender at the end of the world. Moe's Tavern is not the worst bar in Springfield because Moe does not care about the bar. It is the worst bar in Springfield because Moe cares about it in a way that has nothing to do with the things that make bars good. The floor has not been cleaned recently enough for anyone present to be comfortable estimating when it was last cleaned. The beer exists in states that strain the definition of beverage. The lighting achieves a specific dimness that is less a design choice than the natural consequence of bulbs that have not been replaced. The health inspection results are, on the occasions when the health inspectors manage to locate the tavern and find the courage to enter it, remarkable documents. And Moe tends this place every night with the regularity of someone keeping a vigil. He is there before the regulars arrive. He is there when they leave. He is there in the hours between when the bar is empty and the bar is full. And the silence of an empty bar is the specific silence of a place that exists for the purpose of never being too quiet inside the people who come to fill it. In those hours, Moe is alone with whatever Moe is alone with, and the show has never fully named what that is, which is probably correct, because the thing Moe is alone with is the kind of thing that resists naming. He was a boxer, once, the junior bantamweight champion of some regional circuit that the show drops as a biographical detail without expanding on. But the detail is worth expanding on. To be a junior bantamweight champion at any level requires something real. It requires the discipline to train, the willingness to absorb a particular kind of physical punishment in the service of a goal, and the competitive capability to be better than other people who are also training and also absorbing punishment and also wanting to win. Moe had all of that. At some point in his life, before the bar and before Springfield as a permanent container, Moe was a person who committed to something and got somewhere with the commitment. And then something happened, and the bar is what came after. The show does not fully explain the mechanism of the transition. There are pieces scattered across various episodes about Moe's history, about where he came from before Springfield, about what brought him to this specific tavern, on this specific street, in this specific town. But the pieces do not assemble into a complete picture. What they assemble into is an impression, and the impression is of someone who tried something, or who came very close to trying something, and who found the distance between the trying and the arriving at a destination too large to cross, and who stopped somewhere in the middle and built a bar. The bar is the thing you build when you have something to tend and nothing left to pursue. He tends it. Every night, he polishes the bar top that is not very clean, and he keeps the bottles at angles that suggest someone cares about their placement, even if the bottles themselves are not in great condition. And he is there when Homer walks in, because Homer always walks in, and Homer's arrival is one of the most consistent things in Moe's world. which is a world that does not have a lot of consistency in the warm sense. The relationship with Homer is the most revealing thing about Moe's emotional life, more revealing than the bar or the failed relationships or the various schemes that have erupted and collapsed across 36 seasons of episodes. Moe loves Homer with the specific devotion of someone who has oriented a significant portion of his capacity for attachment toward a person who is frequently thoughtless and occasionally harmful and yet undeniably present. Homer is present. This sounds like a low bar. In Moe's world, it is not. He has been shown in various episodes attempting to build other connections, romantic relationships, which tend to go badly for reasons that are sometimes Homer adjacent and sometimes inherent to what Moe is and how he operates in the world. Business ventures, including the restaurant that revealed an entirely unexpected culinary capability and that worked for exactly the duration of an episode before the situation reversed itself. Moments of genuine social engagement with the town, where Moe is briefly something other than the background presence at the bar. These all end. They end and Moe returns to the bar, and to Homer, and to the vigil. The phone calls are the most specific window into what the bar and Homer combination is doing for Moe. The calls from Bart, asking for Amanda Hugginkiss and Seymour Butts, an alcoholic, are a constant that has existed since the very beginning of the show. Moe knows, or strongly suspects, that the voice on the other end of the phone is Bart. He has been doing this long enough to have developed certainty about the pattern. And yet he answers. Every time, reliably, he answers. And he reads the name aloud. Something in Moe needs the call. Not the humiliation specifically, though the humiliation is the surface form the call takes. What Moe needs is the contact. The reaching out of something from outside the bar toward the bar. The evidence that there is a world outside the four walls of the establishment that knows the bar is there and finds it worth engaging with, even adversarially. The calls are social. The phone rings, and someone is on the other end, and they want something from Moe, even if the something is a prank, and Moe is the person they call, and that makes Moe a person worth calling. In the specific emotional accounting that operates inside the tavern during the quiet hours, this is not nothing. He waters his bar's plants. The show drops this in without underlining it. Moe, who presents himself to the world as someone who has given up on caring about most things, tends to something that grows. He keeps it alive. He gives it water and presumably light and whatever minimal attention a bar plant requires to continue existing. The plants are still alive. This is the thing that stays with you about Moe Szyslak. The plants are still alive. The bar is terrible, and the floor is unclear, and the health certificates are fictional, and the liquor is what it is. But the plants are alive because someone shows up every day and tends to them. Someone who has decided, at some point along the long road from junior bantamweight champion to proprietor of the worst bar in Springfield, that some things are worth keeping alive, even when the keeping is modest, and the reward is just the continuing of the living. He tends the bar. He tends Homer. He tends the plants. He answers the phone. The vigil continues. Section 9. Chief Clancy Wiggum. The corruption that smiles back. Chief Clancy Wiggum is the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in Springfield, and Springfield is what it is partly because of this. Let us think carefully about what it means for a town to have Clancy Wiggum standing between its residents and the things that could harm them. The chief who cannot make it a quarter mile without becoming winded. The chief who once arrested the wrong person for an attempted murder and then lost the evidence. The chief whose response to most emergency calls carries the tone of someone who would have preferred the emergency not interrupt what he was doing. The chief who sits in his squad car outside the donut establishment for periods of time that suggest a professional relationship with the establishment that goes well beyond what lunch requires. These are the jokes. They are the material the show uses to build the Wiggum character, and they are funny. And they do what comedy does, which is to take something potentially disturbing and give it a frame that makes it comfortable to look at. The joke version of Wiggum is a bumbling incompetent in a hat too large for his head. The non-joke version of Wiggum is more specific and more troubling. To understand Wiggum, you need to understand what functional law enforcement would do to Springfield. Not perfect law enforcement, Not some idealized version of justice applied with flawless consistency, simply functional law enforcement, a department that investigated things. A department that looked at the available evidence and followed it toward the available conclusion, and then did something with the conclusion. Functional law enforcement in Springfield would investigate the three-eyed fish. The fish appeared in a river that runs past the nuclear power plant, bearing a mutation so specific that it points directly at a single plausible cause, and functional law enforcement would note the fish, note the plant, note the proximity, note the 342 outstanding safety violations that had already been documented and not acted upon, and pursue the connection with the seriousness that a connection between industrial negligence and environmental mutation deserves. Functional law enforcement would investigate the reports of radioactive waste being dumped on public playgrounds. Playgrounds are public spaces, children use them, and depositing radioactive material on them is not ambiguous in its illegality. Functional law enforcement would find the source of the material and pursue the responsible party with the consistency that the evidence would support. Functional law enforcement would look at the owner of the facility that produces this material, note his history of violations, note his resources, note his relationships with the political infrastructure of Springfield, and proceed with the specific care that investigations of powerful people require. Not backing away because the person is powerful. Proceeding carefully because that is what the evidence requires. This is what functional law enforcement would do. This is not what Wiggum's department does. Wiggum's department arrests Homer. It arrests Sideshow Bob. It manages the visible, ordinary, power-neutral crimes of Springfield residents who do not have the resources or the connections to make investigation inconvenient. It shows up after the disasters, after the events that make a showing up necessary for appearances, and it takes the report and it makes the face that says justice is being served, and then it files the report in a place where reports go to become permanent past tense. The gap between what the department investigates and what it does not investigate maps exactly onto the gap between the crimes of Springfield residents with no power and the crimes of Springfield residents with power. This is not a coincidence. It is a department operating in the specific way that a department operating within a specific power structure tends to operate. It serves the structure. The structure happens to be Burns. Burns happens to be the person whose facility is the source of most of what would, under functional law enforcement, constitute the most serious ongoing criminal enterprise in Springfield's history. Is Wiggum doing this consciously? This is the interesting question. The show does not give a definitive answer. What the show gives, across 36 years of Wiggum episodes, is enough ambiguity that both readings survive examination. The first reading is that Wiggum is genuinely what he looks like, a man who is not particularly intelligent, who fell into a profession that gave him a uniform and a car, and a sense of authority that his other qualities would not have generated, who performs his job to the limits of his capacity, and whose capacity happens to be insufficient for the job. Under this reading, the protection of Burns is incidental. Wiggum is not protecting Burns because Burns pays him to. He is not protecting Burns because anyone told him to. He is protecting Burns because Wiggum is not capable of the kind of investigation that would threaten Burns, and the investigation does not happen because Wiggum is simply not up to it. The second reading is darker. Under the second reading, Wiggum knows exactly what he is doing and exactly why. He has assessed the power dynamics of Springfield with the specific pragmatism of someone who understands that survival in a company town requires alignment with the company. He has positioned himself precisely where he needs to be to maintain his position, and maintaining his position requires not looking too hard at certain things, and not looking too hard at certain things requires a performance of general incompetence that makes the not looking look natural rather than deliberate. Under this reading, Wiggum is not the fool. He is the fool's performance. And the performance is immaculate. The show leaves both readings available. This is probably correct. The truth of Wiggum, the one that lives underneath both readings, is that it does not matter which one is accurate. The effect is the same. Burns is protected. The violations continue. The water stays as it is. And Wiggum sits in the squad car and eats the donut and smiles the smile of a man who has no idea what he is doing, or the smile of a man who knows exactly what he is doing. And the two smiles look identical, And that is the thing about Wiggum that is worth thinking about when the lights are low and you have nothing pressing to attend to. His son Ralph is the show's most consistent source of comedy among the child characters, and also, when you look at him from the right angle, a portrait of what the Wiggum household produces in the people it raises. Ralph does not interface with the social world of Springfield Elementary in the conventional way. He says things that suggest a relationship with consensus reality so creative and so personal that the distinction between what Ralph understands and what everyone else understands has essentially stopped being a practical concern for Ralph. He observes things. He reports his observations. He does not filter them through the usual social mechanisms that most children have internalized by his age, the mechanisms that tell you which thoughts to say aloud and which to keep private and which to say to your parents instead. Ralph says all of them aloud. He says them with a guilelessness so complete that it functions in the social world of Springfield Elementary as its own kind of protection. Nobody knows how to be cruel to Ralph in the conventional way, because the conventional cruelty requires the target to register the cruelty as cruelty, and Ralph's operating system does not appear to have a clear pathway for that registration. He was raised in the Wiggum household. He absorbed, from his father, whatever the Wiggum household teaches about how to be a person in Springfield. And what he became is someone who does not perform, someone who is exactly what he appears to be, moment to moment, without calculation or strategy. Someone who reports his experience of the world without the editorial layer that the rest of Springfield maintains. In Springfield, this is unusual enough to be remarkable. The father performs a version of himself that serves specific purposes and protects specific interests. The son performs nothing, because the son is exactly what he is, and what he is enough. The donut, in the squad car, outside the establishment, the smile on Wiggum's face, the question of what the smile knows. Section 10. Sideshow Bob, the genius who chose the wrong story. Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr. is the most educated character in the regular Springfield cast. Multiple degrees, multiple languages, a gift for opera that would be remarkable in anyone, and is, in a man who has spent as much time in prison as Sideshow Bob has spent in prison, a detail so incongruous that the show keeps returning to it because the incongruity contains something true about Bob that the straightforward facts of his life do not quite capture. He is also the person who has made the attempted murder of a 10-year-old boy the organizing project of his adult life. He has tried more ways than any reasonable schemer would commit to, been stopped more times than any reasonable person would accept being stopped, returned to the attempt more reliably than virtually any other character in the show's history returns to anything. He cannot let go of Bart. The show usually handles this as comedy, and the comedy is genuine and often very well executed. The timing of Sideshow Bob's various defeats is frequently impeccable. The show has a gift for the specific comedic rhythm of competence meeting incompetence and discovering, repeatedly, that incompetence wins. But the comedy is doing what comedy does in the show's most interesting episodes, which is providing the frame that makes the darker thing inside it comfortable to look at. The darker thing inside the Sideshow Bob episodes is not the attempted murder. It is the question of what the attempted murder is for. Bob was a television performer before he was anything else. He was the sidekick, the supporting act, the thing that made the clown look like the center of the frame by virtue of being the thing that was not the center. He wore the shoes that were too large and the makeup that was not his face, and he received the things that sidekicks receive, and he performed what sidekicks perform, and the audience laughed at Krusty and incidentally at Bob as Krusty's foil, and the whole enterprise continued. And Bob, who has multiple degrees and speaks several languages and has an operatic voice of genuine quality, did this for what appears to have been a sustained period. He did it, and he was performing something that had nothing to do with what he was. The gap between the person inside the costume and the costume itself was the width of everything Bob actually is. This gap did not close on its own. The show does not tell us exactly when the internal pressure of it became unmanageable, but it was apparently some time before Bob decided to frame Krusty for armed robbery. The decision to frame Krusty was not impulsive. It was planned. It required the specific skill set that Bob has, the intelligence and the patience and the ability to construct something complicated and execute it well. It required him to be himself, fully, in the service of a scheme that would remove the person who was using him as a prop. And then, a 10-year-old noticed that the shoes were wrong. Bart noticed. Not because Bart was conducting a forensic investigation, not because Bart had any particular stake in the outcome, because Bart was paying the kind of attention to the things around him that people who have grown up in chaotic environments pay. A generalized alertness that is not focused on any particular object, but that catches anomalies. And the shoes on the disguised Krusty were an anomaly that a child who had watched Krusty's show enough to know Krusty's feet noticed. Bob's masterpiece was undone by a 10-year-old's incidental observation. This is the humiliation at the center of everything. Not the prison sentence, not the repeated defeat. The specific fact that the person who keeps stopping Bob is the least likely opponent imaginable. Bob is the smartest person in almost every room he enters. He plans at a sophistication level that the Springfield law enforcement apparatus and the show's other regular antagonists cannot match. He constructs schemes that account for multiple variables and execute across complex timelines. Bart is 10. Bart is in the class that Springfield Elementary is not entirely sure should be promoted to the next grade. Bart does not plan in the way that Bob plans. He operates on instinct and improvisation and a social intelligence that has nothing to do with the formal intelligence that Bob deploys. And Bart wins. Every time. This is not something Bob can accept, and the inability to accept it has become the structure of his life. He cannot let Bart be the person who beat him, permanently, definitively, and then moved on. He cannot close the file and do something else. Every time he tries to close the file, every time prison has him at sufficient distance from Springfield that the project might plausibly remain unresumed, the file opens again, and Bob is back in Springfield with a new plan and the same outcome. Why? The answer, the one that the show's comedy has been building around without quite naming, is that the project is the only thing in Bob's life that is entirely his. In a life full of institutions that have classified and assigned him, first the television program that turned him into Sideshow Bob, then the prison system that turned him into inmate, then the occasional political arena that turned him into candidate, the project of ending Bart's life is the one thing where Bob is not subordinate to anyone else's framework. He designed it. He executes it. He makes the decisions. He evaluates the outcomes. He sets the terms of what counts as success and what counts as failure. No institution can tell him what the project means or what it is worth because no institution knows about it, or if they know about it, knows it the way Bob knows it, from the inside, from the position of the person for whom it is the organizing principle. Bob is defined by Springfield as many things: as a criminal, as a threat, as a recurring menace to be managed and remanaged, as the guy with the enormous hair who keeps trying to kill the kid. These definitions are imposed from outside. The project is self-defined. It is Bob's own. The episode where Bob and Bart are stranded together is the show's most honest depiction of what this relationship actually contains. When the threat is suspended, when the immediate project of killing Bart is not the active question, something else becomes visible. They talk. Bob sings because Bart asks, and Bob is incapable of not singing when someone asks, because the opera is the most honest thing Bob has. More honest than the degrees, and more honest than the schemes, and certainly more honest than the enormous hair. He sings and Bart listens, and for a moment, the whole construction of the project falls away, and there are two people who know each other very well, who have been in each other's orbit long enough that the familiarity is real, even if the relationship that produced the familiarity is adversarial. Bart takes Sideshow Bob seriously. This is what the relationship is, underneath everything. Bart does not dismiss Bob. He does not treat him as a bureaucratic nuisance the way the Springfield police tend to. He treats him as a genuine opponent, and genuine opposition is a form of recognition, and recognition is something that Bob has not received in very many places. Krusty's show did not recognize him. It deployed him. The prison system does not recognize him. It contains him. Springfield at large categorizes him and then moves on. Bart keeps his attention on Bob, and Bob keeps his attention on Bart. And in the space of that mutual attention, in the years and decades of episodes where these two characters have been the most focused on each other of anyone in either of their lives, something that is not friendship has accumulated and is not nothing. Bob will try again. He always tries again. The project has not been completed, and the project will not be completed, because completing it would mean closing the file, and Bob does not close the file, because the file is the only thing keeping Bob's life from requiring him to answer a question he has not been willing to ask. The question is, without this, what am I? The opera knows. The opera is beautiful, and it answers the question in the way that music answers questions, directly and without words. But Bob has not learned to hear his own music as an answer. He hears it as an accompaniment to the project, so the project continues. And Bart is still 10, and somewhere, in a prison, or in a scheme, or in a moment of genuine human contact that the show occasionally grants them both, the two of them are still in each other's orbit, circling and circling. Section 11. Krusty the Clown, the saddest man alive who plays it for laughs. Herschel Schmoikel Pinchas Yerucham Krostowski has been putting on the makeup for most of his life. The makeup is the gap between what is inside and what is shown. Every performer knows this gap. Every person who has stood on a stage or in front of a camera and produced an experience for an audience knows that the experience being produced is not the same as the experience of the person producing it, that the two things are related but distinct, and that learning to hold both at once is one of the fundamental skills of the work. Krusty holds both at once. He has been holding both for long enough that the distinction between the two has become blurry, in the way that distinctions become blurry when they have been maintained across decades of daily application. He does not always know, in a given moment, whether the person feeling the thing is Herschel or Krusty. They have merged in the specific way of things that are worn long enough. The father wanted Herschel to be a rabbi. More than wanted, he needed it. Rabbi Hyman Krostowski had imagined his son's future in a specific form and had organized his hopes around that form with the completeness that a certain kind of love organizes itself around a certain kind of expectation. He saw in Herschel the next link in a chain of observance and learning and service that had meaning to him in excess of its practical content. He saw his son as his continuation. And Herschel wanted to make people laugh. The specificity of what Herschel wanted is important. Not performing broadly, not a vague aspiration toward entertainment. He wanted the specific act of making people laugh, the thing you know you want when you have discovered that you can do it, and that the doing of it produces something in the room that is unmistakable and that feels, when it is working, like connection, like a bridge being built between you and every person whose laughter you can hear. He chose the clown, and the father sat Shiva. He was mourned as dead while he was alive. He walked out into a world that would make him famous and that would give him the thing he wanted, the laughter, and he carried with him the specific knowledge that his father had performed his death. This is not a recoverable wound. It can be addressed, which is what the reconciliation episode does, and the addressing is real, and the reconciliation is real, and the show earns both of those things. But a wound that has been carried for that long, that has been the context for every career achievement and every late-night broadcast and every handshake with a sponsor and every rubber chicken and every product endorsement for things that are actively unsafe for children, does not close simply because the relationship that caused it is restored. What happened to Herschel in the space between the sitting Shiva and the reconciliation was that he became Krusty in a way that was no longer entirely temporary. He built the career around the wound, without fully knowing he was doing it. He found in the audience a substitute for the thing the rabbi had withheld, the approval, the recognition, the sense that what he was producing had value to someone who mattered. The audience mattered. The audience was, for long enough, everything. The gambling and the smoking and the multiple marriages and the debts and the product endorsements for things the children who watch his show should not be using, All of this is the texture of a man managing the gap between what the audience gives and what the audience cannot give. What the audience cannot give is what a father gives. The audience's approval is conditional in the specific way that crowds are conditional, present when the show is working and not present when it is not, and never, in any version, available in the private hours between performances when Herschel needs it most. He fills those hours with the gambling and the cigarettes. He fills them with the marriages that do not last, because what Krusty brings to relationships is Krusty rather than Herschel, and Krusty is a persona built for performance rather than intimacy. He fills them with the debts that suggest a man who does not fully believe the prosperity will last, who converts it into risk as quickly as it accumulates, who has not quite allowed himself to believe he gets to keep the things he has. The reconciliation with the rabbi healed something real. The show is honest about this. The scene where Bart and Homer help facilitate it, where the door between father and son finally opens after decades of the door being closed, is genuinely moving in a way that requires no analysis to feel. The love was always there. The wound kept it separated from its expression. And then the rabbi died, as fathers eventually do. The reconciliation happened, and then the father was gone, and Krusty was left with the healed wound in a world where the person the healing was with was no longer present to confirm it. He put the makeup back on. He keeps putting the makeup on. Morning after morning, in the dressing room that smells like cigarette smoke and pancake foundation and the accumulated scent of a life built in the space between the public person and the private one. He looks in the mirror, and Herschel looks back, and then Krusty looks back, and then the mirror can take either interpretation, depending on the morning. The show has been honest about the cost. It has been honest about the loneliness and the debts and the marriages and the estrangement from a child he did not know he had, and the product endorsements and the health violations in the food the show sells to children, and the general air of a man whose professional life is better constructed than his personal one. But it has also been honest about the thing underneath the cost, which is that Krusty genuinely loves his audience, not as a resource, not as a market, in the specific way that performers who started by discovering they could make people laugh and found that discovery meaningful continue to find it meaningful even after the career built around the discovery has accumulated all the complications that careers accumulate. He loves the kids. He loves the laughter. He loves the moment when the show is working and the crowd is with him, and the gap between Herschel and Krusty temporarily does not matter because both of them are doing the same thing at the same time, which is being present for the connection. These moments sustain him. They are probably not enough to sustain him the way that other things, the things he did not build his life around, might have sustained him. But they are real and they are his, and he shows up for them every broadcast day, every Saturday morning, every occasion when the makeup goes on and the cameras run. He puts on the makeup, he shows up, the audience laughs. And Herschel Christofsky, somewhere behind the painted face and the enormous shoes and the rubber chicken and the 36 years of complicated history, hears the laughter, and something in him that does not have a name, but that has been there since he was a child, discovering he could make rooms feel the way he made rooms feel. Something that survived the sitting Shiva and the reconciliation and the death of his father and the marriages and the debts. That something is glad. He was right to want this. He has always been right to want this. The rest was complicated. The wanting was true. Section 12. The town itself. Springfield as a character and what it diagnoses. Springfield does not appear on any map. This is, in the official accounting, a creative decision. Matt Groening named the town after Springfield, Oregon, where he grew up, and then built the show around a deliberate geographical ambiguity that would prevent the town from being located with certainty in any real American state. The intent was universality. Springfield should feel like it could be any American town, everywhere and nowhere, familiar to viewers regardless of where they were actually watching from. This explanation is true, and it is also the beginning of a longer story. Because Springfield is not just difficult to locate, it is geographically impossible by the rules that govern the physical world outside of it. It has coastline, it has mountains, it has desert, it has lush farmland, It has a harbor and a gorge, and an active volcano, and a beach and a tundra, within the range of a single episode's establishing shots. No American community occupies the intersection of all these ecological zones. No state contains the diversity that Springfield contains within commuting distance of its central business district. The geography, in other words, does not follow the rules. And if the geography does not follow the rules, then Springfield is not breaking continuity by being in Ohio one episode and near Mexico the next. It is simply being consistent with what it is, which is a place that operates outside the normal constraints of the physical world, in the same way that it operates outside the normal constraints of biological aging and institutional accountability and the usual relationship between cause and consequence. The coma theory, which holds that everything since 1993 is Homer's dream, provides one explanation for the geographical impossibility. Homer's dreaming brain does not have a precise map of America. It has impressions and fragments and the accumulated geography of every place Homer has ever seen or driven through or watched on television. His unconscious assembles Springfield from all of these, layering them without regard for cartographic accuracy, because dreams operate on emotional logic rather than geographic logic. Springfield has mountains because Homer remembers mountains. It has coastline because Homer remembers coastline. It has all of it simultaneously because the dreaming mind does not sort by region. The radiation theory provides a different explanation. If the plant has been altering the physical reality of Springfield along with the biological reality of its residents, there is no obvious reason why the alteration would stop at biology. The space itself has been subjected to decades of whatever the cracked cooling towers and the dumped waste and the leaking reactor have been producing, and the space has responded to this the way the fish responded, by developing characteristics that do not occur naturally, by becoming something that the normal rules were not designed to account for. The collective denial theory, the one the Principal and the Pauper episode made visible in its most explicit form, adds a third dimension. Springfield resets because Springfield chooses to reset. The geography cannot be pinned down because pinning it down would give it a fixed jurisdiction, a consistent regulatory authority, a permanent EPA district with ongoing oversight of the facility that has been the source of most of the town's most serious problems. A Springfield that is in Ohio is subject to Ohio's environmental regulations. A Springfield that is also near Mexico, and also on the coast, and also in the heartland, and also near the Canadian border, and also somewhere that begins with a vowel according to the state capital recording, that Springfield is subject to nothing consistent, because consistency requires location, and location has been kept permanently ambiguous. It is a legal shield built out of geography. You cannot regulate a nuclear power plant you cannot find on a map. So the map stays empty where Springfield should be. Now let us look at what the town does to the people inside it, across all the characters we have spent this exploration with, and let us see if there is a pattern. Homer, cognitive function reduced by a combination of physical damage and environmental exposure, kept employed through a deal that benefits the person the employment serves. Emotionally shaped by maternal absence engineered by his employer. Constitutionally unable to see the connection between the thing that broke him and the thing that employs him. Marge, intelligence and capability redirected entirely into household maintenance, isolated from peers, maintaining herself through the continuous suppression of what the maintenance costs, loved but not known, carrying the weight of a family that would dissolve without her carrying, in a town that has never formally acknowledged the carrying. Labeled by an institution that serves the same power structure his family serves, his specific intelligence rendered invisible by a framework that cannot see it, his energy channeled into rebellion that poses no real threat to anything that matters, frozen at the age of maximum potential with minimum protection.
The only person in the family paying full attention to what Springfield actually is, consistently unheard in the ways that matter, finding sustenance from sources that keep leaving, playing her instrument into a night that does not always listen. The one who has learned from watching all of the above that visibility is the thing to avoid, that silence is the armor, that the best place to operate is the one that nobody monitors, because everyone assumes the monitor is unnecessary.
Burns, the source of the force that shaped all of them, surviving past all natural limits, protected by money and medical infrastructure, and a loyal assistant who keeps the schedule, watching the town he manages the way a person watches something he owns. Ned, the one who tries to be good in a system that does not reward goodness, conditioned before he could consent to the conditioning, bereft of the thing his faith told him he would receive, absorbing the consequences of other people's failures with a patience that is not entirely his choice. Mo, the one who found the dead end and built a bar in it, tending the bar with the devotion of someone who has decided this is what he is now, keeping the plants alive in a place where keeping things alive is not the first value the establishment presents. Wiggum, the law, smiling and inscrutable, protecting what it protects through the ambiguity of whether the protection is deliberate. Sideshow Bob, the one who understood what was done to him and responded by organizing his intelligence around the wrong target, unable to let go of the story that gave him his only self-defined project. Krusty, the one who put on the makeup to fill a wound, and who found that the makeup had become the face, and the face had become the person, and the person was still, underneath it all, the child who just wanted to make room sound like laughter. What does this collection of people, assembled in a town that cannot be located and will not age, and insists on resetting between catastrophes, and makes it illegal to speak the truths that would require the reset to stop, what does this collection of people diagnose? It diagnoses what a community looks like when the structures designed to protect it are captured by the interests that benefit from the community remaining exactly as it is. Not just corrupted in the obvious ways, the bribery and the cronyism and the direct exchange of money for favorable outcomes, though all of those things are present in Springfield too, but captured in the subtler and more durable ways, the ones that do not require ongoing transactions because they have become the default functioning of the institution. The school does not teach Bart because teaching Bart would produce a person more capable of questioning his circumstances, and the school's survival depends on the circumstances remaining stable. The police do not investigate Burns because investigating Burns would dismantle the structure the police exist within. The medical system does not treat what the plant is doing to the population because treating it would require acknowledging the source, and acknowledging the source would require someone to be responsible, and the person who would be responsible is the person whose resources the medical system depends on. These are not conspiracies in the active sense of people meeting in rooms and deciding to do harm. They are the accumulated outcomes of a system that has been running long enough that the harm has become the baseline. The harm is normal. The harm is just how things are in Springfield. And because the harm is normal, because it has been normal since before most of the current residents were born, the question of why things are this way does not arise naturally. It would have to be asked, deliberately, by someone who had decided to ask it, and the town has spent decades building conditions that make asking it difficult, and consequences that make persisting in asking it dangerous. The real Seymour Skinner was expelled on a train. The truth was tied to the railroad car and removed from the community under a legal decree that made speaking it a punishable offense. That is the endpoint of the mechanism, the most explicit version of what Springfield does with inconvenient truths. But the mechanism does not usually reach that endpoint because it does not need to. Most of the inconvenient truths get managed much earlier in the process. They get managed by the water and the air and the 4 decades of neurological exposure that make the connections harder to hold together. They get managed by the economic dependency that makes challenging the source of the dependency feel like economic suicide. They get managed by the social contract of a small town that has decided its stability is more important than its accuracy. The show has been describing this for 36 years. It has been describing it in the only way that the show can describe anything, which is through the characters and the situations and the accumulated weight of detail upon detail upon detail until the picture becomes impossible to unsee. It never says, "This is what is happening." It never has a character turn to the camera and explain the argument, because if the show said it directly, the audience could receive it as analysis, as someone else's argument about someone else's town, and then agree or disagree and move on. By saying it through Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie and Burns and Ned and Moe and all the rest, by embedding it so thoroughly in the texture of the characters that it cannot be separated from them without taking them apart entirely, the show produces something different from analysis. It produces recognition. You know these people. You know this town. You know the person who is brilliant in a way the school cannot see, and the person who holds the family together without being asked, and the person who performs a rebellion that costs nothing where it matters, and the person who keeps showing up despite having every reason to stop. You know them because they are the template that American life has been producing for generations, in every town that has a plant on the hill, and a boss who has been there too long, and a police department that shows up, and a school that manages rather than teaches, and a bar where the lonely gather, and a church where the faithful wait, and a family on a couch in a house on a street that could be any street in any town that has accepted, gradually and without ceremony, the terms of its own containment. Springfield is not a warning about where America might go. Springfield is a portrait of where it already was when the show began drawing it in 1989. The plant was already on the hill. The boss was already in his chair. The water was already doing what water does when you have been putting things in it for a long time. The family was already on the couch. The Simpsons sat down, and the credits rolled, and the show began, and the laugh track ran. And somewhere in the middle of the laugh track, underneath it, in the frequency that the comedy keeps too busy to hear, the show has been saying the same thing every single episode for 36 years. Pay attention. Look at what is in the water. Look at who benefits from the reset. Look at the gap between the law as written and the law as applied. Look at the fish. Look at the fish. It has 3 eyes and nobody in Springfield is asking why, and you are watching from wherever you are watching from, and the question is whether you are watching Springfield or whether you are watching somewhere closer to home. Rest now. The family is on the couch. The television is on. The credits roll and the theme plays and the familiar warm light fills the screen. Bart is still 10 years old. Lisa is still 8. Maggie is still 1. And still watching, still waiting, the pacifier still in her mouth, and the enormous eyes still open, and the calculations still running behind them, with all the patience of someone who has decided that the right moment has not yet arrived. Homer comes through the door at 5:30. The same time he always comes through the door, because in Springfield it is always 5:30. It is always the moment just before the family gathers. It is always the threshold of the evening that the show promises will be funny and safe and familiar. He comes through the door. The couch is there, the family is there, and the plant is on the hill, with the light in the window and the cooling towers releasing what they have always released into the Springfield sky. The town does not appear on any map, but you know where it is. You have always known where it is. Good night. End of script. He chooses to go back to sleep. It is worth sitting with what that scene actually is. Not within the show's comedy framing, where the decision plays as a joke about Homer's preference for comfortable ignorance over uncomfortable awareness, but as an honest portrait of a man facing an actual dilemma with real stakes on both sides. The intelligent Homer, the one who emerged after the crayon was removed, looked at his life with the full cognitive equipment that had been suppressed since childhood and found it unbearable. This is the detail the show acknowledges and then moves past too quickly. It was not that Homer became intelligent and then made better decisions about the things he was already doing. He became intelligent and discovered that many of the things he was already doing were symptoms of something larger and more structural than personal choice. His job, which he had previously experienced as simply his job, the thing he did every day in Sector 7G, became visible as the expression of a deal his father made with the man who had destroyed his family. His employer, who he had previously experienced as simply an authority figure distinguished primarily by his inability to remember Homer's name, became visible as the person who had driven his mother underground for 27 years. The plant, which he had previously experienced as simply the background of his working life, became visible as the probable source of the changes in his own biology and the biology of his children, and the biology of every resident of Springfield who had been drinking the water and breathing the air for decades. The intelligent Homer could see all of this. And then he looked at the gap between what he could now see and what he could actually do about it. And the gap was absolute. He was one person with one salary and one house in a town built around a system that had been running for longer than he had been alive, and that was maintained by someone with resources so far in excess of anything Homer could bring to bear against them that the asymmetry was not just practical but philosophical. Seeing clearly and being unable to change what you see is not liberation. It is a specific and unusual kind of suffering that has its own name in certain traditions, and that Homer, being Homer, did not have the vocabulary for but felt in his entire body during the span of the HOMR episode. He chose the fog because the fog was the only option that did not require him to live inside the full weight of something he could not fix. This choice is the most human thing Homer Simpson has ever done. Not the most admirable, not the most heroic, but the most human, in the specific sense that being human sometimes means choosing the manageable version of an unmanageable situation, choosing to not see what seeing would only make worse without giving you any mechanism to make it better. The show judges this gently. It does not condemn Homer for the choice. It acknowledges, through the letter he wrote to Lisa before putting the crayon back, that the intelligence was real, and the love was real, and the awareness was real, and that none of those things were incompatible with choosing to return to the version of himself that could live inside his life without being destroyed by the clarity of seeing it. The letter says, "I am not smarter than you, Lisa, but I love you, and the love is the thing that will survive the crayon." She weeps reading it. He puts the crayon back, and the intelligence goes away, and Homer comes home at 5:30, and the couch catches him, and the beer opens, and the family gathers, and the evening does what Springfield evenings do. Nothing in the household changes because nothing in the household has ever been required to change. The system accommodates Homer exactly as he is, because the system was built around Homer exactly as he is, because Homer exactly as he is what the system needs. He is useful. He is harmless in the ways that matter to the structure. He is employed. He is present. He is not asking the questions that would require the structure to produce answers that might compromise it. He is home. That is the word the show returns to, over and over, across every season and every episode and every reset. Home. Homer always finds his way home. The couch, the kitchen, the family. The house on Evergreen Terrace that is both the product of his limitations and the greatest thing his limitations ever produced. Whatever Homer has lost, whatever the crayon and the radiation and the deal and the maternal absence took from him across 63 years of in-show time, the house on Evergreen Terrace is his. The family in it is his. The love he has for them, which does not require a working frontal lobe to be real, which survives the fog and the stupidity and the strangling and the Homer-shaped disasters that follow him everywhere. That love is entirely and completely his. And he would burn the plant down for them if he could see clearly enough to understand why he should. He cannot. So he comes home instead. He always comes home.
The casseroles are emotional.
The specific mechanics of how Marge manages the household are worth describing because the show depicts them continuously, and the continuous depiction tends to make them invisible. Invisible in the way that things become invisible when they are performed consistently over a long enough period, when the performance becomes so reliable that its absence would be catastrophic, but its presence is treated as ambient. Marge wakes up before everyone else in the house. This is not depicted in every episode, but the evidence of it is everywhere. In the breakfasts that are ready when the family comes downstairs, in the clean clothes that appear in drawers, in the managed baseline of a household that would devolve into chaos in approximately 48 hours if no one was performing the management that Marge performs. She tracks all of it. The grocery situation, which in the Simpson household requires genuine vigilance given Homer's relationship with the refrigerator, the school schedules for Bart and Lisa, which are not simple given the volume of disciplinary events that Springfield Elementary generates around Bart specifically, The household finances, which are perpetually complicated by Homer's tendency to invest their savings in ideas that the idea-to-reality conversion process has not yet been kind to. The medical appointments, which in a town like Springfield require the additional labor of determining which medical advice to trust and which to treat with the skepticism that a medical establishment under the influence of its primary employer's interests deserves. She does all of this, and she also worries. The worrying is the show's most consistent characterization of Marge's interior life. She worries about Homer, about Bart, about Lisa, about Maggie, about the neighbors, about the town, about the situations the family keeps finding itself in, and the ones it has not yet found itself in, but that she can see from her position as the person paying attention to everything. The worrying is usually played as Marge's most anxious quality, the thing that makes her the cautious voice in a household of risk-takers. But the worrying is also information processing. Marge worries about things that she has already identified as potential problems, things that her consistent monitoring of the household and the family and the town has flagged as requiring attention. The worrying is the sound of someone who has modeled a set of scenarios and found that the scenarios require management. She is right about most of them. The worry usually turns out to have been appropriate to the situation it was focused on. The Homer plan usually does go the way she worried it would go. The Bart situation usually does escalate in the direction she saw coming. The thing she worried about usually proves to have been worth worrying about. And the response to this pattern, from the family, is generally to reassure Marge that she worries too much. This is the specific dynamic that the show has maintained with enough consistency that it constitutes a statement rather than a recurring joke. The person whose assessment is most accurate is the person whose assessment is most consistently dismissed. The person who identifies the problem in advance is told she is being anxious rather than being heard. She absorbs this too. She folds the accurate assessment and the dismissal of it into the same place she folds everything else, into the casserole and the hum and the hair that stays up regardless. There is a quality to Marge's patience that is not entirely the same as the virtue of patience. Patience, in its most admirable form, is the product of a choice. The choice to stay present in a difficult situation because the situation deserves presence, because leaving would be easier but less right. Marge's patience is also a choice, and it is also the right one from where she is standing. But it is additionally the product of a set of conditions that have narrowed the available alternatives. Marge does not have a peer group in Springfield who receive her fully and with whom the relationship is genuinely equal. She does not have a career that runs parallel to the family and that provides her with an identity outside the household. She does not have, really, a version of herself that exists in the outside world and that is known to that world as something other than Homer's wife or the children's mother. These things are not absent because Marge did not want them. They are absent because the household and the town together have not left consistent space for them. This is not anyone's fault in the direct sense. Homer does not prevent Marge from having a career through deliberate obstruction. The town does not explicitly prohibit her from having a peer group. But the structure of the marriage and the household and the demands of managing everything that Marge manages leaves very little space for the things that are not required. And Marge, having the character she has, tends to fill the available space with management rather than insisting that the management be redistributed so that space becomes available. In a household with Homer Simpson, insisting that the management be redistributed tends not to produce effective redistribution. It tends to produce Homer trying and making things worse in specific and Homer-shaped ways that then require additional management to correct. So Marge manages. She has always managed. She will continue to manage for as long as the show continues, which is to say forever, which is to say until Springfield finally lets time pass and the children age and the hair finally comes down. The hair is still up. The hum continues. The eggs are ready when the family comes downstairs. He kept moving. He always will. There is a quality to Bart's movement through Springfield that deserves more attention than the show's comedy framing usually allows. He moves through the town with the specific fluency of someone who has learned its geography from the ground up, who has used every shortcut and exploited every gap in the fencing, and knows which adults will look away and which will not, and which routes allow for the kind of forward momentum that the skateboard requires. He knows Springfield the way you know a place you have been trying to understand for your entire life, by being in it constantly, by pressing against its edges to find out where they give and where they hold. This is not a small skill. The show tends to present Bart's knowledge of Springfield as incidental, as the byproduct of a delinquency that takes him through the town's various corners. But the knowledge itself, the understanding of the town as a system, with specific weak points and specific resistances, is the kind of thing that a different kind of institution would recognize as valuable. A boy who has mapped the physical and social geography of his entire town before the age of 11 is a boy who has been paying systematic attention to his environment. Springfield Elementary has never found a way to give this attention an outlet. The curriculum does not contain a space for what Bart has done, which is essentially a comprehensive field survey of every exploitable characteristic of a mid-sized American town. The curriculum wants him to demonstrate the kind of knowledge that gets demonstrated on standardized tests, and the knowledge Bart has does not appear on standardized tests. So it appears on the skateboard. It appears in the prank that exploits the specific flaw in the specific authority figure's specific blind spot. It appears in the schemes that Bart occasionally runs with the competence of someone who could be running legitimate enterprises if legitimate enterprises were available to him in a form he could access. The show occasionally gives him one. An episode will place Bart in a context where his abilities are recognized and his energy is given a useful direction, and Bart will flourish in that context with the gratitude of someone who has been waiting for the right container without knowing what the container should look like. And then the episode ends, and the container disappears, and Bart is back on the skateboard. He has been waiting for 36 years for someone to build the right container and leave it available longer than one episode. Nobody has. Nobody in Springfield has the resources or the imagination to build it, and the one person who did, Mr. Bergstrom, was Lisa's for a single episode and was not staying anyway. Bart stays. Bart will always stay. The skateboard cuts through the traffic, and the slingshot takes aim, and the phone rings at Moe's, and Bart is 10, and Springfield is Springfield, and the container does not exist. But he maps the town anyway, carefully, comprehensively, with the attention of someone who has decided that understanding where he is might eventually become useful, even if the usefulness has not yet arrived. One day, maybe, it will be enough.
Somewhere in the dark, something might be listening.
The saxophone is also a way of being in Springfield without being consumed by it. This is important. Lisa has not separated herself from Springfield in the way that a person who has given up on a place separates themselves from it. She has not retreated into cynicism or detachment, or the kind of protective irony that a brilliant person in a bad environment sometimes develops as armor. She is still there. She is still raising her hand and still asking the question and still expecting, against all available evidence, that someone might eventually answer. The saxophone is how she maintains the distance required to continue doing this. It is the practice that belongs entirely to her, that no one in Springfield can diminish through dismissal or inattention, because the playing is not offered to Springfield for its assessment. It is offered to the night, to the air, to the specific version of silence that follows a jazz phrase and contains, for a moment, the shape of what the phrase was. Jazz operates on a different relationship with resolution than most music. It approaches the tonic, the home note, the place where the music comes to rest, and then it delays the arrival. It explores the territory around the home note, it finds every way to be adjacent to resolution without achieving it, and then it arrives. But the arrival feels earned rather than inevitable, feels like something the music chose rather than something the music was obligated to do. Lisa plays jazz because Lisa does not do the thing she is supposed to do on the schedule she is supposed to do it. She chooses when to arrive at the conclusion. She explores the territory around it first. She makes the audience wait, not out of cruelty, but out of an understanding that arriving too quickly at the right place is the same as not having looked at all the ways the right place could be reached. This is Lisa's relationship with every question she raises in Springfield. She does not present the conclusion first. She works toward it from multiple directions. She examines the evidence from different angles. She considers objections. She revises. And Springfield, which wants the conclusion delivered simply and quickly, and without the obligation to follow the work that produced it, finds this process irritating. She plays anyway. She examines anyway. She raises the hand anyway. Somewhere, there will be a room that can follow the music all the way through without asking her to resolve faster. Somewhere, there will be people who want to hear the whole phrase rather than just the ending. She is still looking for that room. She has been looking for it from the second chair of the Springfield Elementary Orchestra for 36 years. She will find it. Everything the show has ever suggested about who Lisa will become points toward finding it. She will find the room, and she will fill it with saxophone, and the room will not ask her to be smaller than she is. Until then, the night, the steps of the house on Evergreen Terrace, the open Springfield air. She plays. And then she went back to waiting. The patience is the most extraordinary thing about Maggie. Not the intelligence, which is extraordinary in its own right. Not the strategic silence, which is sophisticated beyond what any developmental model would predict for a 1-year-old. The patience. She has been waiting for 36 years. She has been in the high chair and in the stroller and in her mother's arms and in the corner of the living room and in every room of the house on Evergreen Terrace, watching the family go through everything the family has gone through, and she has not broken cover. She has not let the intelligence out where someone might notice it in a way that would change how they treated her. She has not spoken. 36 years is a long time to maintain a strategy. It is a long time to hold a position that requires continuous active choice rather than passive default. Every day that Maggie does not speak is a day she chose not to speak. Every episode in which she could have said something and did not is an episode in which she assessed the situation and determined that the situation did not yet meet the conditions for speaking. What are the conditions? The show does not tell us. This is the last, truly unsolved mystery of the Simpson family. We know what Maggie knows. We know what she has done. We know that she is watching and waiting, with a patience that most adults could not sustain for a fraction of the time she has sustained it. But we do not know what she is waiting for. The moment, perhaps. The specific convergence of information and opportunity and readiness that makes the calculated action possible. The moment when what she has been building behind the silence, the understanding and the planning and the patient accumulation of everything she has seen and heard and processed across 36 years of being in the room, when all of that is ready to become something. Or perhaps the word. Perhaps Maggie is waiting to find the right word, the one that will mean enough to be worth breaking the 36-year silence for. A silence that long is a commitment. Breaking it is a decision that cannot be made casually. Daddy. She said daddy once. The word she chose for the one time she spoke was the word for the person in the family who needs her most, the person whose damage is deepest and whose love is largest, and whose life has been shaped by forces he cannot see into something that should be less than it is, but that the love keeps making more. She said daddy to Homer, and then she stopped. Maybe the word is still forming. Maybe what comes after daddy is the sentence that contains everything she has learned in 36 years of watching the family and the town from the corner of every room. The sentence that explains what the plant is doing, what Burns has done, what the water carries, what the air contains, what the deal was and what it cost, and where the money went, and who knew, and who chose not to know, because knowing was less comfortable than not knowing. Maybe Maggie is waiting until she is sure she can say all of it in one breath. Maybe the pacifier is just the placeholder for the sentence. The calculation continues. The bones in the basement deserve their own consideration. One of the show's most casually devastating details, dropped in the episode cataloging the plant's violations and never revisited, is the presence of human skeletal remains in the basement of the nuclear power plant. Human skeletons in the basement of a working reactor facility, not depicted as alarming, noted as a violation, filed away. Nobody asks who they were. Nobody asks how they got there. Nobody asks whether a facility that contains human skeletal remains in its basement is a facility that has, at some previous point in its history, caused or concealed human deaths. The safety inspector notes the skeletons and moves on to the next item on the list. Burns has been operating this facility for most of a century. He was there before Homer's parents were born. He was there when the town was younger, and the regulatory infrastructure was thinner, and the political environment was, if anything, more amenable to the kind of operations that produce skeletal remains in basements without those remains becoming the subject of official inquiry. Who they were is something the show will never tell us, but the suggestion that the plant's history includes deaths that were covered up, that the current violations represent the present state of an operation that has been producing harm for far longer than anyone currently complaining about the three-eyed fish has been alive, is there in the bones, quietly, persistently, in the basement. Burns knows they are there. Of course he knows. He knows everything about the plant, because the plant is the mechanism of his survival. He probably knows who they were, and the fact that he knows and has maintained that knowledge in private for however long the skeletons have been there is consistent with everything else we know about how Burns relates to the consequences of his operations. He notes them. He moves on. He steeples the fingers. He keeps the calculation running. The basement holds its secret. The cooling towers release what they have always released. The fence between the houses is intact. Consider the specific arithmetic of what Ned has endured over 36 years of episodes and what it adds up to across the span of a life. The show's comedy requires Ned to be the recipient of misfortune at a rate that, in any realistic accounting, would produce in most people either a breakdown or a departure. Ned has had neither. He has stayed in the house next to Homer's. He has maintained the fence. He has returned the borrowed equipment. He has waved across the property line with a smile that, under the behavioral modification theory, is not entirely his own choice, but that he nonetheless produces continuously, reliably, with the consistency of something that has been practiced so long it has become automatic. What accumulates underneath the practiced smile is the thing the hurricane episode briefly let out. Not just the frustration at Homer specifically, though that frustration is real and legitimate and fully earned by the evidence. The deeper thing, the accumulation of what it costs to be the good man in a town that does not particularly value goodness. The very specific loneliness of being the person who does everything right and watches the person who does nothing right receive everything anyway. God talks to Homer. Homer stumbles into divine conversation the way Homer stumbles into most things, without intention, without particular effort, while half asleep during a church service, or in the middle of a dream, or in the specific fog of a Sunday afternoon that was supposed to be restful. God shows up. God talks. Homer participates with the level of engagement Homer brings to things he has not planned for, which is intermittent attention and genuine confusion, and occasional insight that arrives from somewhere below the frontal lobe, where the crayon used to press. And Ned prays. Ned prays with the specific vocabulary and the specific posture and the specific sustained intention of someone who has organized his spiritual life around the practice of prayer. He builds a relationship with the divine through the regular application of attention and the willing subordination of his own preferences to what the faith asks of him. He forgives because the faith asks for forgiveness. He gives because the faith asks for generosity. He turns the other cheek because the faith asks for it, even when turning it means offering Homer another opportunity to cause damage. He does all of this, and the silence from the direction of heaven is so complete that after 36 years, it has become its own kind of presence. The absence of divine conversation is the most constant thing in Ned's spiritual life. He prays into the absence. He maintains the relationship with the absence. He continues to believe that the absence is not abandonment, because the alternative, that the absence is what it looks like, is a thought that the conditioning was designed to prevent him from sustaining. He continues. The sun comes up over Springfield. Ned is already awake. The fence is intact. There is a version of Mo Sislak that exists in the spaces between the episodes, in the hours the show does not depict, when the bar is closed and Mo is alone in the tavern with the chairs up on the tables and the television showing something he is not quite watching, and the silence of an empty bar that was designed to never be too quiet inside the people who fill it, but that has to be empty sometimes. In those hours, what does Mo do? The show does not say. But the show has given enough pieces that an impression forms. He probably tends the plants. He probably sits at the bar on the customer side, which people who work behind bars sometimes do when they are alone, because the customer side feels different from the bartender side, and feeling different sometimes matters. He probably drinks something, not aggressively, not in the Barney sense, but in the quiet way of someone who works with liquor and has learned to treat it as something between company and medication. He might call someone. He might not. His phone contacts are limited by the kind of social world a bar proprietor in Springfield is likely to have built, which is to say they are mostly the regulars, and calling a regular in the off hours is a different kind of relationship than having someone to call who is genuinely glad to hear from you. Homer is glad to hear from Mo. This is the honest thing. When Mo calls Homer, Homer's response is not the response of someone managing an inconvenient relationship. It is the response of someone who is genuinely pleased to have been thought of. Homer receives Mo's calls with the warmth he has available for people he has decided are his, and Mo is one of his. And this matters to Mo in the hours when the tavern is empty, and the chair is on the customer side, and the television is showing something he is not quite watching. The bar exists because Mo needed somewhere to be. The bar continues to exist because other people also need somewhere to be. And the somewhere Mo built turns out to be useful for a certain kind of person, in a certain kind of mood, at a certain hour of a certain Springfield day. It is not a beautiful place. It is not the place you would build if you were building from hope, rather than from whatever Mo was building from when he built it. But it is there. It is open. The beer is what it is, and the floor is what it is, and the light is dim in the specific way of places that have decided not to ask too much of their customers. And when Homer walks in, Mo is behind the bar. He is always behind the bar. This is the most reliable thing in Mo's world, which is a world that has not always been reliable. And the reliability is not small. The plants are alive. The bar is open. Mo is behind the bar. The donut in the squad car outside the establishment. The relationship between Wiggum and Springfield's political infrastructure is worth examining because it illustrates how the protection of the status quo works in the absence of dramatic corruption. Springfield has not installed Wiggum through obvious bribery in the way that the show sometimes depicts fictional corruption operating. Wiggum did not receive a cash payment in exchange for looking the other way. His installation as chief does not appear to have required any single dramatic transaction. What it required was a selection process that was already shaped by what the position needed. The position needed someone who would fill the visible function of law enforcement without performing the substantive function. The selection process, whatever form it took in Springfield, identified Clancy Wiggum as the right fit for this need and installed him. Whether this was conscious on the part of the people doing the selecting, or whether it was the natural outcome of an institution that had already oriented itself toward the kind of chief who would not be a problem for the structures that mattered, the result was the same. Wiggum is chief. The plant's violations continue uninvestigated. The water stays as it is. Burns continues to conduct his operations with the confidence of someone who has never been seriously inconvenienced by law enforcement. The system works as designed. What makes this worth thinking about is that it does not require active conspiracy to produce. It does not require a meeting room and an agenda and an explicit agreement between Burns and a police chief about which investigations to pursue and which to decline. It requires only an institution that has been operating inside a specific power structure long enough that the power structure has become the institution's ambient assumption about what the world is like and what the institution's role within that world is. This is how the majority of institutional complicity actually works, not through dramatic corruption, but through the accumulated normalization of who the institution serves and who it does not. Wiggum is not a villain in the Burns sense. He is something more ordinary and therefore more durable. He is a man who has found a position that fits his capabilities and that requires him to do exactly what his capabilities allow him to do, which is to fill the visible function without threatening the invisible structure. He eats the donut. He wears the hat. He smiles. The smile is the thing. It is the town's most sincere expression of how Springfield relates to itself. It is a smile that says everything is fine, that the law is present and functioning and paying attention, that the community is protected by its institutions. The smile does not ask whether the institutions are protecting the community from the things the community most needs protection from. The smile is not designed to ask that question. The smile is designed to replace the question. Everything is fine. The hat sits on his head. The donut disappears. And Bart is still 10. The opera that Bob sings is not incidental to who he is. It is who he is, at the level that survives all the other identities that have been imposed on him. The criminal identity that the legal system assigned when he went to prison, the sideshow identity that Krusty assigned when he cast him as the sidekick, the villain identity that Springfield assigned when his pattern of behavior became the dominant fact the town knows about him. Before all of those, before the framing of Krusty, and before the big shoes, and before the first prison sentence, there was a person who could produce from his body something that required years of discipline and genuine natural capacity, and a relationship with music that went deep enough to make the music come out when the situation asked for it. Bart asked for it once. He asked in the spirit of genuine curiosity about who this person was when the project was not the active question, and Bob answered in the spirit of someone who had been waiting, without knowing he was waiting, for someone to ask. He sang. It was beautiful. And then it was over, and the project resumed, and the two of them went back to what they were to each other in the frame the show maintains around their relationship. But the opera is still there, under the project, under the prison record, and the criminal record, and the character the show has built around Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr. across 36 years of episodes. The thing that was there before any of it is still there. It has not been extinguished by the years in prison, or by the repeated defeats, or by the specific and accumulated humiliation of being beaten by a 10-year-old every single time. He sings when someone asks. He still sings beautifully. This is the most hopeful thing about Sideshow Bob. Not that he might eventually stop trying to kill Bart, though the show occasionally flirts with storylines that gesture in this direction without committing to them. Not that he might eventually find a constructive outlet for his considerable gifts, but that the gifts are still there. That the prison and the schemes, and the enormous hair and the project, have not consumed what was there before all of them. He can still sing. That means something. In the accounting of what Springfield does to the people inside it, the fact that some core of what a person actually is survives the Springfield process intact, even in the most extreme case, even in the case of a man who has spent more time in prison than not, means something. He still sings. And somewhere in there, behind everything the show has made him, Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr. is still the person who could make a room stop and listen with the specific quality of attention that a voice of genuine quality produces. He has just not yet found the room that wants to listen for longer than a single-stranded episode on a deserted island. He keeps looking, between the schemes. He always will. The wanting was true. There are performances in the history of Krusty the Clown's career that the show depicts as low points and that are, when you look at them from the right angle, something else. The product endorsements for things that no responsible broadcaster should be attaching a children's entertainer to. The appearances that are clearly contractually obligated rather than personally motivated. The episodes of the show within the show where Krusty is visibly going through the motions, where the energy is not there and the audience is too young and too generously disposed toward the man in the makeup to notice. In those moments, Herschel is showing through the makeup in a way that the comedy framing usually keeps covered. The man who did this, because he wanted to do it, because the wanting was real, and the connection it promised was real, is in that chair with the rubber chicken going through the motions because the contracts are signed and the time slot is scheduled, and someone paid for the advertising, and there are children in the audience who showed up because the makeup means something to them, even when it does not currently mean as much to the person wearing it. He shows up anyway. This is the unsung thing about Krusty. He shows up. For all the gambling and the marriages and the debts and the cynicism and the endorsements and the health violations in the food products and the general air of managed entropy, he shows up for the broadcast. He puts the makeup on. He walks onto the set. He picks up the rubber chicken. Because somewhere in the schedule and the contracts and the professional obligations, there are also the children who are in the audience and who have come because the makeup means something to them. And Herschel, who started this because he wanted to make rooms sound like laughter, cannot entirely let that go, even in the low points. Even when the energy is not there in the way it was when the wanting was new, the children are there. They laughed before. They will laugh again. He picks up the rubber chicken. He does the thing. And sometimes, in the middle of a broadcast that was supposed to be an obligation, and that became instead one of those moments where everything works, and the crowd is really there, and the timing lands exactly right, and the laugh comes from the right place in the room, in those moments, Herschel is fully present. Not Krusty, Herschel, the child who wanted to make people laugh, and found out he could do it. The wanting was always true. Springfield has one more secret that the show has been keeping in plain sight for 36 years. It is perhaps the strangest and most American thing about the town, and it is this: the people who live inside it love it. Not with the resigned attachment of people who have nowhere else to go. Not with the dark nostalgia of people who remember when things were better. Homer loves Springfield. Marge loves Springfield. Even Lisa, who sees Springfield most clearly and whose future is most definitively located somewhere beyond it, loves Springfield in the specific way you love the place that made you, even when the making was not gentle. This is the thing about living inside something that is bad for you. The badness does not necessarily diminish the love. Sometimes the love and the badness occupy the same space, and the love is not a denial of the badness, but a separate truth that coexists with it. Homer loves the couch, and the beer, and the plant, and the donuts in the break room, and the specific weight of Springfield's afternoon light on the walk home from the bus stop. He loves these things without needing them to be other than what they are. He loves them the way people love the particular texture of the life they have lived, which is the only texture of life they have actually experienced. Marge loves the kitchen, and the neighborhood, and the specific rhythm of a Springfield day, and the sense of being embedded in a community that knows her, even when the knowing is partial and the community is limited. She loves the town even though the town does not love her back as specifically as it should. Bart loves the freedom of Springfield's streets, and the specific quality of trouble that Springfield's institutions generate, and the fact that he knows every shortcut and every gap in every fence and every face of every adult whose attention is worth avoiding. He loves the town in the way that you love a place you have mapped comprehensively from the inside. Lisa loves Springfield the way you love a problem you have not yet solved. With the attention that unsolved problems demand and the attachment that comes from having given them so much of your attention for so long that they have become a relationship. This love is not a reason to keep the plant running, or to leave the water as it is, or to accept the bones in the basement as background information. Love is not the same as acceptance. The family's love for Springfield is compatible with the town being exactly as broken as it is. The brokenness does not cancel the love, and the love does not cancel the brokenness. They are both fully true at the same time. This is the last thing the show has been saying with all its accumulated seasons of evidence and pattern and detail and character. That the love is real, and the harm is also real, and that the two things coexisting in the same place is not a contradiction. It is the human condition, expressed in yellow. They love Springfield. Springfield is what it is. They live there anyway. The plant is on the hill. The family is on the couch. The television is on. The credits roll. The theme plays. The couch gag happens. And then it starts again, the way it always starts again, the way it will always start again, because that is what Springfield does, and that is what we need it to do. And the difference between those two things, between what Springfield does and what we need it to do, is where the show has always lived, in that difference, in the space between what the town is and what the family needs it to be. In the light from the television, on the faces of the people we have spent this exploration with, the broken man who chose the fog, the woman who keeps the hair up, the rebel who maps the town from his skateboard, the prophet who plays into the dark, the strategist behind the pacifier, the immortal who glows, the good man who was conditioned before he could choose, the bartender in his vigil, the badge that smiles and keeps its own counsel, the genius who chose the wrong story, the clown who puts on the makeup, and the town that holds all of them inside its impossible geography and its unlocatable coordinates and its collective determination to keep going and to call the keeping going home. Home. That is the word. That is the whole word. Good night. Additional deep expansions. Homer's relationship with beer deserves a longer look than the show usually gives it, because the beer is doing more than one thing. On the surface, the beer is a comedy prop. It is Homer's default reward, his default comfort, his default response to situations that range from genuinely difficult to mildly inconvenient. He drinks after a hard day at work, and after a good day at work, and after a day where not much happened, and on weekends, and during games, and while watching television, and sometimes during meals. The frequency is played for laughs, and the Duff Beer brand is a running gag, and the Lenny and Carl drinking culture at Moe's is a social comedy set piece. But Homer's relationship with alcohol, when you pull it out of the comedy frame and look at it in the longer context of what we know about Homer's life, is the relationship of someone who learned very early that the most reliable way to manage the gap between what you feel and what you can do about what you feel is to make the gap temporarily narrower through external means. Homer cannot process his emotions with the cognitive equipment available to him. The crayon left him with a frontal lobe that does not perform the integration functions that the frontal lobe is supposed to perform. He feels things, he feels them intensely, and without the filtering mechanism that would allow him to modulate the intensity or direct it productively, and then the feeling arrives at a body and a vocal apparatus and an action selection system that are not well equipped to receive it. The beer slows this down, it does not stop it. Homer's emotional life is not suppressed by the alcohol. He is still moved, still reactive, still capable of enormous tenderness and enormous frustration, and the full range of emotional response that makes him, in the moments when it is received by someone who knows how to receive it, one of the most emotionally legible characters on television. But the beer takes the edge off the rawness, and in a person who is experiencing emotions without adequate cognitive filtering, the edge is where the damage tends to happen. He drinks because it helps. This is not a defense of the drinking. It is an observation about what the drinking is doing and why it has been a feature of Homer's life for as long as the show has depicted his life. The beer is the management strategy available to someone who was never given better tools. The plant contributes to this in ways that are not entirely clear, but that the available evidence suggests. Chronic radiation exposure in the doses that Springfield residents appear to have been accumulating affects the neurological systems that regulate mood and emotional response. If the plant has been doing what the three-eyed fish and the luminous rats and the 342 violations suggest it has been doing, then Homer's emotional volatility, his difficulty with modulation, his tendency to swing between enormous warmth and reflexive frustration without an adequate internal buffer, is not simply a character trait. It is a symptom. He manages the symptom with beer. He has been managing it since before the show began depicting him managing it. This is the infrastructure of Homer's dependency, not moral weakness, not simple hedonism. A man doing with the available tools what he was never given better tools to do, in a body that has been altered by the same source that took his mother and employed him for the purpose of maintaining its own violations, in a town that has converted all of this into the comedic texture of its most beloved character. He comes home at 5:30. He opens the refrigerator. He takes out the duff. He sits in his chair, and he exhales, and the day settles around him, and for a moment, for the specific duration of the first duff on the couch, the gap narrows enough that Homer can sit in his own life, without the weight of everything the life contains pressing against his incomplete ability to carry it. The family is home. The gap is manageable. He drinks. The relationship Homer has with each of his three children is distinct in a way that the show's comedy tends to flatten, but that the quieter episodes preserve. And the distinctness illuminates something specific about who Homer is when the comedy is not running. With Bart, Homer's love is combative and physical and impossible to miss and also impossible to fully receive because it arrives alongside the strangling and the frustration and the reflexive reaction to being provoked that Bart has specialized in provoking. They are too similar in certain ways, Homer and Bart. They share the specific kind of intelligence that works laterally rather than linearly, that is good at reading people and bad at reading instructions, that finds its expression in movement and reaction and improvisation rather than planning and patience. The similarity is part of why Homer's response to Bart tends to be so immediate, so direct in its transition from warmth to frustration. He sees himself in Bart, and the seeing is not always comfortable, because what he sees is who he was before the plant, and the crayon, and the decades had done their work, and who he was before all of that was someone who also did not fit neatly into the containers the world had provided. He loves Bart the way you love the version of yourself that still had options, with the ferocity of someone who has lost something irreplaceable and who keeps finding it looking back at him from a 10-year-old's face. With Lisa, the love is different. It is odd in a way that the Bart love is not odd. Homer is not awed by Bart because Homer can track Bart's logic, even when the logic is going somewhere he would prefer it not go. He cannot track Lisa's logic. She operates at a frequency that his damaged frontal lobe cannot quite tune to, and the gap between them, the cognitive gap, is wide enough that Homer experiences it as a kind of distance. But the love crosses the distance. This is what the show keeps coming back to, and what the HOMR letter captures most fully. Homer's love for Lisa is not contingent on his ability to understand her. It does not require comprehension. It lives below comprehension, in the part of him that simply knows she is extraordinary, and finds that knowing unbearable and beautiful in equal measure. He has cried for Lisa. Homer Simpson has produced tears in response to his daughter's sadness in enough episodes to constitute a pattern, and the pattern is not comedy. The pattern is a man who cannot give his daughter what she needs, who cannot follow her where her mind wants to go, who cannot provide the peer recognition or the intellectual community or the sustained engagement with her ideas that she deserves and that Springfield cannot give her, who can only give her what he has, which is enormous, clumsy, imprecise, frequently delivered at the wrong moment in the wrong form with the wrong words, but enormous. With Maggie, the relationship is the purest. Maggie does not speak. Maggie does not challenge or confront or require Homer to engage at a cognitive level that exceeds his current equipment. Maggie simply exists in Homer's presence and receives the love he gives her and returns it in the specific way that babies return love, which is through presence and reach and the weight of their small body against whoever is holding them. Homer holds Maggie the way he holds the things he knows he cannot protect forever, with both hands, with the awareness that she is temporary in this form, that she will not be this small and this reachable and this entirely his forever, that one day she will be grown and will have opinions about things that exceed his understanding and will be someone specific in the world in a way that takes her beyond what he can hold. He holds her the way he holds the evening before it ends, the way he holds the warm house against the Springfield dark, the way he holds everything he loves in a life that has given him so much less than it should have, and so much more than the life he was given had any logical reason to produce. He holds her. He does it for her. He has always done it for her. The plant is on the hill. The family is home. He holds her. Marge's relationship with Springfield as a community, as opposed to as a household, is one of the show's most telling ongoing observations about what small towns do to the women who keep them running. Springfield as a community is dependent on Marge in ways that the community has never formally acknowledged and will never formally acknowledge, because the acknowledgement would require recognizing the labor as labor, which would raise the question of what the labor is worth and who has been benefiting from it not being named. She joins the school boards and the parent committees and the neighborhood associations when these things need joining. She attends the meetings, she reads the materials, she shows up prepared and engaged in situations where many of the other participants have done neither of these things. She contributes to the collective management of Springfield's civic life with the same diligence she applies to the management of her household, and the community receives this contribution with the same ambient gratitude that a household receives reliable infrastructure, which is to say, it is noticed when it is absent and assumed when it is present. The town has used Marge as a resource across 36 years without adequately accounting for what the use costs her. This is not unique to Springfield. It is the specific dynamic that small communities have always applied to the women who hold them together. The dynamic where the holding is essential and invisible and unpaid and treated as the expression of a nature rather than the expenditure of an energy. Marge's nature is not to manage. Her nature, the one that lives under the management, the one that comes forward in the painting episodes and the cause episodes and the brief windows when the household allows her something that belongs to her, is the nature of someone with genuine creative and intellectual capacity who found that capacity redirected very early into practical application. She could have been an artist. The show establishes this in multiple episodes with enough specificity that it is not just a throwaway detail. When Marge paints, the paintings are good. Not hobbyist good. Actually good, in the sense that they produce a response in people who look at them that goes beyond polite appreciation. She has an eye. She has the instinct for what a composition should do and the technical ability to make it do that thing. She paints instead of being a painter. She makes breakfast instead of making art. Not because the breakfast is less important than the art. The breakfast is more immediately necessary in the specific situation she is in. But the necessity of the breakfast does not cancel the loss of the art, and the loss of the art is part of what the hum is humming about in the quiet kitchen before the family comes downstairs. Springfield does not know this about Marge. It knows Homer's wife, the children's mother, the woman who shows up for the civic meetings and brings something good to the potluck, and who looks worried when things go wrong, and who can be counted on. It does not know the painter. She hums. She keeps the hair up. She makes the eggs. And somewhere inside the hum, the painter is still there, waiting with the patience of someone who has decided that the moment is not yet right, but that the moment will come. Maybe. There is a specific tax that clarity levies on the people who have it in a community that has collectively decided not to have it. The tax is social. It is the isolation of being the person in the room who says the true thing when the room has agreed not to say the true thing. It is the specific friction of inhabiting a space where your most honest engagement with the world keeps producing conflict with the people around you, not because they are cruel, but because the honesty challenges their arrangements. Lisa pays this tax continuously. Every episode in which she identifies a problem and speaks it. Every dinner where she raises the question the family had collectively decided not to raise. Every classroom where the hand goes up and stays up past the point where the teacher wants it to stay up. Every moment in which her accuracy is inconvenient to the status quo that her accuracy is addressing. She has been paying it since she was old enough to speak. The tax compounds. 8-year-old Lisa is bright and earnest and still somewhat protected by her age from the full weight of what clarity costs. She can still be dismissed as precocious. She can still be managed with the combination of praise for her intelligence and redirection of her questions that institutions use to handle children who are asking better questions than the institution can answer. But Lisa knows the management is happening. She has known for a long time that what reads as encouragement from the adults around her is actually containment. The gold stars are not saying, "Yes, keep asking." They are saying, "That was a very nice question. Here is a star. Now the conversation is over." She keeps asking anyway. The saxophone is where the tax is processed. The playing into an empty or largely indifferent night is what happens to the energy that the tax has been accumulating. It does not discharge it entirely. Nothing discharges it entirely. But it converts it into something that has a form, that can be heard by anyone who is listening, that can exist in the world as itself, rather than as the suppressed content of a question that was asked and not answered. The music is the answer the town cannot give. She plays it back, every night. Let us try to articulate what Maggie has actually been building, behind the silence, across 36 years of watching from the high chair. She has been building a complete picture, not a partial picture, not the picture that the individual members of the family have, each of them seeing their own portion of the situation without the context that would allow them to see the whole thing. Maggie has the context. She has been in every room. She has the full sequence of events from the perspective of the one observer who has never been filtered by the cognitive limitations or the emotional investments that filter everyone else's view. She knows the deal with Grandpa. She was there when the family learned about it, and she processed that information with the cognitive equipment of someone who can hold multiple threads simultaneously and understand how they relate to each other. She knows about Mona. She knows the sequence. The biological weapons facility, the activist raid, the moment when Mona stopped to help Burns and Burns saw her face, the 27 years, the reunion, the second departure, the death. She has the whole story in its correct sequence. She knows about the plant. She knows about the violations, not in the way that the adults in the family know about them, as background information that occasionally becomes foreground when the plot requires it, but in the way that someone who has been systematically storing information about a subject for 36 years knows about it, with depth and with pattern, and with the ability to see what the pattern means. She knows about the three-eyed fish. She knows about the water. She knows about her own biology and her siblings' biology and her parents' biology and what the 4 decades of exposure have likely done to the family at a cellular level that nobody in Springfield's medical establishment has elected to examine. She knows what the yellow skin means. She knows what the 4 fingers mean. She knows what it means that the fish has 3 eyes, and that the town looked at the fish and shrugged and moved on. She has been holding all of this, in silence, behind the pacifier, for 36 years. What she will do with it depends on the moment. The moment has not yet come. Or perhaps the moment has come, and Maggie's assessment of the situation is that the moment requires something more than she currently has access to, in the form of an infant's body and an infant's apparent status. Or perhaps the moment is coming. Perhaps the silence is the approach to the moment, the long, quiet stretch before the thing that breaks the quiet, the sustained pause before the music resolves. If Maggie speaks, what she says will be important, not because of who she is to the family, but because of what she knows about the town, because of the complete picture she has assembled from the vantage point that nobody monitored closely enough to see. The most dangerous information in Springfield is not in the plant's files, or in Burns's private medical records, or in the deal that Grandpa made. It is in the high chair in the corner of the Simpson living room, behind the enormous eyes and the perpetual pacifier, in the mind of the 1-year-old who has been there for every important conversation and who understands every word of every one of them, and who has decided, for reasons the show has never fully revealed, to wait. She waits, she watches, the calculation runs. There is a specific thing that happens to people who have held power for long enough that the holding of it has become their primary relationship with the world. The thing is not madness exactly, though it sometimes produces behaviors that read as madness from the outside. It is something more like the total replacement of empathy with strategy as the primary mode of engaging with other people. Empathy requires the belief that other people's interior lives are real and that their reality matters. Strategy does not require this belief. Strategy requires only the modeling of other people's likely behavior in response to various inputs, which can be accomplished without any investment in whether their interior lives are real or their well-being matters. The strategist does not need to feel what the other person feels. The strategist needs only to predict what the other person will do. Burns has been a strategist for over a century. In 100+ years of treating other people primarily as inputs in a calculation, the belief that their interior lives are real and matter has not been maintained in any form that would be recognizable to someone for whom empathy is still a functioning mode. He knows people in the way that a very old computer knows the behavior of the systems it has been modeling for its entire operational life. He knows what Homer will do in a given situation because he has been observing Homer for decades, and Homer is consistent in the ways that predictable things are consistent. He knows what Smithers will do because he knows Smithers's attachment to him and knows how attachment affects decision-making. He knows what Springfield's political infrastructure will do when presented with a financial incentive because he has been presenting financial incentives to Springfield's political infrastructure for longer than the current occupants of those positions have been alive. He does not know what any of these people feel about any of this. He does not know what it is like to be Homer. He has not thought about this. The question of what it is like to be Homer has never been a useful question from Burns's strategic position, so the question has never been asked. This is the emptiness at the center of Burns's extraordinary longevity. He has survived. He has maintained. He has outlasted every challenge to his position, every threat to his empire, every physical attack on his body. But the thing that he has sustained across all those years is something that, over a sufficient time horizon, has become increasingly hollow. He is running the calculation. The calculation has always been running. But the calculation is the thing that is left when the rest of it, the capacity for genuine relationship, the experience of one's own life from the inside, rather than as a set of strategic variables to be managed, has been replaced by the continuous operation of a machine that is very good at maintaining its own operation, but that has long since forgotten what the operation was originally for. He steeples his fingers. He narrows his eyes. The calculation continues. And somewhere in the basement of the nuclear power plant, in a room nobody enters for reasons that have never been formally documented, the bones remain where they have always been. The psychiatrist who conditioned the anger out of young Ned Flanders was probably acting in good faith. This is worth considering because it complicates the picture. He was a professional, operating with the best understanding of behavioral modification that his era and training provided, hired by parents who were genuinely distressed by the violence and chaos of their child, and who wanted something better for him. The something better that the conditioning produced is Ned as we know him, the patient and forgiving and faith-centered neighbor who lends Homer equipment and waves across the fence and turns the other cheek, and whose response to being repeatedly harmed by the people around him is to forgive them and to continue. Was this the something better the parents wanted? Probably. Was it the something better that Ned would have wanted if Ned had been given a developmental process that allowed him to choose, rather than a conditioning protocol applied before he was old enough to consent? The show does not answer this directly, but it places the answer in the hurricane breakdown, which is the show's most honest depiction of what Ned's conditioning has cost him. What came out during the breakdown was not random. It was accurate. Everything Ned said to the town during the breakdown was the truth about how the town had treated him, delivered in the specific tone of someone who had been managing that truth for decades and who had finally run out of room to keep managing it. The breakdown was the suppression failing, the thing underneath the conditioning asserting itself past the point where the conditioning could hold. And the truth underneath the conditioning was Ned, not the conditioned Ned, the performing Ned, the Ned who had been built by the behavioral modification, the original, unconditioned person who felt things and expressed them and was in some ways terrifying and in other ways simply real. Springfield institutionalized him for this, for being real in a way the conditioning had been designed to prevent. He was returned to himself in the conditioned sense. The conditioning was reasserted. The diddly-doodlies resumed, and nobody in Springfield, including Ned, acknowledged what had been briefly visible during the breakdown. The truth was managed back into its place, and the surface was restored. This is what conditioning does when it holds. It makes the suppression look like the self. It makes the management look like the person. And after enough time, after enough repetition, the distinction between the suppression and the self becomes genuinely blurry, and the person doing the suppressing can no longer easily tell which is which. Ned probably cannot tell. At this point, after 36 years of performing the conditioned self and occasionally and briefly breaking through to the other one, the question of which Ned is real, the one who forgives or the one who briefly told the truth during the hurricane, may not be answerable even by Ned. What is real is the faith. What is real is the love for his sons, which is genuine and consistent and expressed in the way that someone who was raised without good models of parental love might express love, which is carefully and methodically and with a great deal of attention to whether he is doing it right. Rod and Todd are growing up in the Flanders household. They will emerge from it with their own relationship to faith and forgiveness and the performance of virtue. Whether they will emerge with the conditioning, whether the cycles of what the household produces in children will be replicated or modified in the generation that follows Ned, is something the show has never explored. But the fence is intact. The equipment is available to borrow. The diddly-doodlies are in order. Ned Flanders tends his side of the property line. He tends it well. The floating timeline is the show's most honest lie. It is a lie in the obvious sense. People age, children grow, and a show that has been running for 36 years should contain characters who reflect those 36 years if it is depicting reality. The characters do not reflect them. Bart is 10. He has always been 10. He will always be 10. The timeline floats because allowing it to land would change the show in ways the show is not willing to change. This is the lie. The honesty is in what the lie reveals about what we need the show to be. We need it to be the show where the children are always children, where the Saturday morning feeling of the Season 3 episodes is still available in the Season 36 episodes, where Marge's hair is still blue, and Homer's 5 o'clock shadow is still exactly 5 o'clock shadow, and the couch is still there, and the family still lands on it in the couch gag, and the theme plays, and Springfield is Springfield. We need this because the alternative is aging. Not just the characters aging, but ours. The 36 years that have passed since the show began have passed for us, not for Springfield. We were children when the show started, some of us. We are adults now, or we have been adults for a long time. Or we are the children of people who were adults when the show started, and who watched it, and who passed it down the way you pass down things that feel like they belong to your family. The show's refusal to age is our refusal to age. We keep the characters young because keeping them young keeps something about ourselves young. The version of us that was 10 years old and watching Bart be 10 years old is still alive in every episode, still present in the recognition that the theme song produces, still in the room. Springfield stops time because we cannot stop time, and we need something in the world that can. This is the floating timeline's most honest function. It is not a narrative convenience. It is an emotional service. It keeps a version of the past continuously available in the present. It ensures that when you need to go back, when the world outside has gotten to be too much and you need the specific comfort of something that will be exactly as you left it, Springfield is there. The couch is there. The family is there. The plant is on the hill. The fish still has 3 eyes. But the family is there. And the family being there is enough. It has always been enough. It is perhaps the most honest thing the show has ever said, that what we come back for is not the plots or the theories or the mysteries or the predictions. We come back for the family. We come back for the specific weight of sitting on a couch in Springfield on an ordinary evening and watching 5 yellow people be imperfectly themselves to each other. That is the thing. That is the whole thing. The rest is just Springfield. Springfield is enough. Final expansions to complete sections. Homer Simpson's world is small in the geographic sense and enormous in the emotional one. The physical territory he occupies is modest. The house on Evergreen Terrace, the plant on the hill, Moe's Tavern, positioned at the specific point in his day where the plant ends and the couch begins. The Quickie Mart, which serves as a secondary node in Homer's logistical universe, a place where the specific combination of things Homer needs between other destinations tends to be available at prices that suggest the existence of overhead charges that Apu has never fully disclosed. Springfield Downs, the Springfield Nuclear Power Plant Cafeteria. These are the places where Homer spends the majority of his episodes, and the show has built each of them with enough specific detail that they function as distinct emotional territories within Homer's geography. The couch is the center of everything. This is established so firmly by the couch gag itself that it barely needs to be stated, but the couch is worth thinking about in terms of what it represents in Homer's interior life. The couch is where Homer arrives. At the end of the day, after the plant, and after Moe's, and after whatever the episode has put between him and the place he needs to be, he arrives at the couch, and he sits down, and the family assembles around him, and the television comes on, and for the duration of the evening, Homer is home. The couch does not ask anything of him. This is the specific virtue of the couch. The plant asks him to perform a function he is not equipped to perform. Moe's asks him to maintain the social role of a regular who is present and engaged. The world outside asks him to be navigable in ways that his cognitive equipment makes navigating difficult. The couch asks only that he sit down. He sits. The beer opens. The television talks at him. The family is nearby. The evening does what Springfield evenings do. This modest geography is the whole world Homer needs, and the show has spent 36 years depicting this as simultaneously the funniest and the most moving thing about him. That a man who has been to space, and to other countries, and to multiple exotic destinations in his various episodic adventures, returns, always, to the same couch, in the same living room, in the same house. And the returning is the point, rather than the destination. The geography of Homer's world is the geography of his emotional needs. He needs the couch. He needs the beer to be cold. He needs Marge to be nearby, even when they are not in the same room. He needs to hear the children doing whatever the children are doing in the rest of the house, the sound of them as ambient evidence that the family is intact and present. He needs Moe's to be open at the end of the day, so that the transition from the plant to the couch has a gentle middle stage. He needs the Quickie Mart to be improbably well stocked with the specific combination of things Homer discovers he needs between one place and another. This is the whole world. Not all of Springfield, not even most of Springfield, just this constellation of places connected by the specific logic of Homer's daily life. When that world is threatened, Homer acts. Not thoughtfully, not with a plan, but with the ferocity of someone defending the only territory that matters. The plant can fail him in countless ways, and he absorbs it. The town can go through any number of catastrophes, and he floats through them. But when the couch is threatened, when the family is threatened, when the specific small world that Homer has built around his needs is in genuine danger, the show consistently reveals that Homer is capable of things that his ordinary cognitive limitations would not suggest are available to him. He saves the family. He always saves the family. The mechanism changes each episode, but the outcome does not. Homer gets to the couch. The family is there. The beer is cold. The evening resumes. This is what the plant could not take from him. The deal Burns made with Grandpa ensured Homer would always have the job. But the job was never the point. The couch was the point. The family was the point. The plant just paid for the couch. There is a question that the show has been building toward for 36 seasons and that it has never quite brought itself to ask directly, which is, does Marge know? Not know in the way that Homer does not know, the fog of radiation and crayon and damaged cognition keeping the information from assembling into a coherent picture. Not know in the way that Bart does not know, the knowing being available in principle but the cognitive framework for making use of it not yet fully developed. Not know in the way that Lisa knows, which is that Lisa knows and cannot do anything with the knowing because knowing and having the leverage to act on what you know are different things. Does Marge know in the way that the most intelligent person in the household, the one who has been paying the most comprehensive attention for the longest time, who has watched every piece of evidence come through the house and has processed each piece with the diligence of someone who does not allow herself the luxury of not paying attention, might know? The show never says, and the not saying is one of its most carefully maintained ambiguities. There are moments in Marge's storylines where she appears to be on the verge of a conversation about what the plant is and what it has been doing. Moments where her worry takes a specific directional quality, oriented toward the hill rather than toward the immediate household crisis. Moments where her management of the family's health and diet and environment includes what looks, if you are looking for it, like the management behavior of someone who has an unacknowledged model of the threat she is managing against. She buys filtered water when the budget allows it. She worries about what the children eat in ways that go beyond normal parental nutritional concern. She is alert to the children's health with a vigilance that is consistent with the baseline anxiety of a mother in a household with Homer's accident rate, but that could also be consistent with something more specific. Or she does not know. She manages because she has always managed. The water filter is because Marge is thorough. The nutritional vigilance is because Marge cares about the children's health in a general way. The alertness is what the alertness always is, which is Marge being the person in the household who pays attention because no one else is reliably paying attention. The show has left both possibilities open, and both are honest. Marge, with full knowledge, managing the effects of the plant within the constraints of what she can actually change, would be one kind of tragedy. Marge, without knowledge, managing the symptoms without understanding the source, would be another. Either way, she is managing. She is always managing. The casseroles are hot. The filter is in the tap. The children are accounted for. The hair is up. She hums. The education that Springfield did not give Bart. The education that Bart has received exists entirely outside the Springfield elementary curriculum. It is an education in the social mechanics of institutions, in how authority works and where its weak points are, in the specific gap between the rule as stated and the rule as enforced, which is never the same gap, and which most people only learn to navigate through extended experience with the enforcement side of various rules. In the precise art of knowing which adult is going to look which way at which moment, which is not a skill that gets formally taught anywhere but that emerges from a thorough and empirical engagement with the adults who populate your daily environment, Bart has this education comprehensively. He has been receiving it since he was old enough to identify that there was a difference between what the institution said and what the institution did, which appears to have been quite young. The Springfield elementary curriculum has nothing to teach him about this. The curriculum teaches the official version of how institutions work, the version in which rules are applied consistently and authority is legitimate, and the relationship between students and the school is fundamentally cooperative. Bart knows this version, and he knows the actual version, and he operates in the actual version with a fluency that would be the envy of anyone navigating a complex organization, if anyone in a complex organization were paying attention to how Bart operates. He does not waste effort where effort produces no outcome. This is the most important skill he has developed, and the one the school has most thoroughly failed to recognize as a skill. The school interprets Bart's selective engagement with the curriculum as evidence of incapacity or unwillingness. Bart is neither incapable nor unwilling in any absolute sense. He is accurately allocating his attention based on his assessment of where the attention will return something and where it will not. The subjects where Springfield Elementary's curriculum connects to something Bart's actual intelligence can engage with, he does. The subjects where the curriculum is disconnected from anything his kind of mind finds meaningful, he does not. The school records this as a consistent performance problem. It is actually a consistent demonstration of how attention works when it is not being forced into a shape that does not fit it. The education Bart has received outside the school is more practically applicable to the world he actually inhabits than most of what the school has offered him. He knows Springfield in a way that classroom learning does not produce. He knows people in a way that textbook social studies does not address. He knows how to read a situation faster than most adults and how to use what he reads in ways that are productive to his immediate goals. Springfield Elementary will pass him to the next grade eventually, because the alternative is retaining him, and the administrative cost of retaining Bart Simpson is higher than the administrative cost of allowing him to continue not learning in a higher-numbered classroom. He will graduate, eventually, into a world that has no better infrastructure for what he actually is than the school that failed to recognize it. And he will navigate that world the way he has always navigated Springfield. Sideways. Faster than anyone expects. With a competence that nobody who knew him at Springfield Elementary will have predicted. He will be fine. The show suggests this consistently in the futures it imagines for Bart, which tend to place him in positions that require exactly the skills he has, rather than the skills the school tried to give him. He will be fine. He is 10 years old. He has time. The saxophone is also a survival tool. This is not a metaphor. It is a functional description of what the instrument does for Lisa in the specific environment of Springfield. Survival in a hostile environment requires the maintenance of something internal that the environment cannot reach. Something that belongs entirely to you, that is not subject to the environment's assessment or approval or dismissal, that continues to function regardless of what the environment does to the other parts of your life. For people in hostile environments, this internal thing takes different forms. Some people develop the internal thing through religion, through a practice that connects them to a dimension of experience that the hostile environment cannot easily touch. Some people develop it through intellectual work, through a domain of thought and inquiry that they can inhabit regardless of their circumstances. Some people develop it through relationship, through one or two connections that are strong enough to function as a buffer against everything else. Lisa has all three: the faith in her own ethical commitments, the intellectual life of her reading and her thinking and her political and philosophical engagement, the occasional relationship, brief and precious, with someone who genuinely receives her. And the saxophone. The saxophone is the most reliable of the four, because it is entirely self-contained in a way the others are not. Faith requires belief to sustain it, and belief can be shaken. Intellectual life requires access to the stimulation that maintains it, and Springfield's intellectual environment is not reliably stimulating. Relationships require the other person's continued presence, and the people who genuinely receive Lisa tend not to remain in Springfield. The saxophone requires only Lisa and the saxophone. The practice sustains itself through practice. The playing produces the thing that the playing is for, which is the experience of being fully and precisely oneself, in the specific way that playing music that you have developed a real relationship with produces. When Lisa plays, she is not performing for an audience. She is not seeking approval. She is not calibrating herself against anyone else's ceiling. She is simply playing, and the playing is the fullest expression of who she is, available to her in Springfield. This is what survives the school's dismissal, what survives the family's gentle inability to follow her, what survives the town's collective preference for comfortable ignorance over the kind of clear-eyed engagement that Lisa embodies. The music survives because the music lives in a place that none of those things can reach. She plays late at night when Springfield is quiet and the saxophone's voice goes into the dark without anyone having to receive it. And this is fine. And this is enough. Because the playing is not for anyone. The playing is for her. She plays. The dark receives it. This is enough. What Wiggum's department does, functionally, is perform the presence of law enforcement without materially altering the distribution of accountability in Springfield. This is a more sophisticated function than it appears. Performing the presence of law enforcement requires the maintenance of enough visible activity to satisfy the population's need to believe that the law is operational. Cars must be seen in the streets. Arrests must occur at visible intervals. The uniform must be present at civic events. The chief must make statements to the press when statements are required. All of this Wiggum's department does reliably. The cars are visible, the arrests occur, the uniform appears, the statements are made. From a distance, from the perspective of a Springfield resident who is not paying close attention to whether the arrests correspond to the actual crimes being committed or whether the visible activity is correlated with meaningful reduction in harm, the department looks like what a police department is supposed to look like. This is the performance, and the performance is what the power structure requires. Burns does not need an effective police department. He needs the appearance of an effective police department because the appearance satisfies the population and the satisfaction keeps the population from demanding more. If Springfield's residents demanded an effective police department, they would need to be met with one, and an effective police department would eventually reach the plant. The appearance prevents the demand. Wiggum performs the appearance. The plant continues. This is not a conspiracy requiring coordination and written agreements. It is an emergent property of a system that has been running long enough that each part of it has settled into the role that the system rewards. The system rewards police chiefs who perform without threatening. Wiggum performs without threatening. The system rewards his continued occupancy of the position. He is rewarded. He continues. The plant continues. The donut is warm. The squad car is comfortable. The smile is on his face. The tragedy of Sideshow Bob is not that he is evil. The tragedy is that he has been placed in the wrong category. Springfield knows him as a villain. The legal system knows him as a felon. The show's audience knows him as the recurring antagonist who tries to kill Bart. These categories are not inaccurate in a factual sense. He has done the things that justify them. The framing of Krusty was real. The subsequent attempts on Bart's life were real. The prison sentences were earned by the actions that produced them. But the categories do not contain him. He exceeds them in ways that the categories have no mechanism for registering. The multiple degrees, the linguistic capability, the operatic voice, the strategic intelligence that, applied in a different direction, would be a genuinely remarkable professional asset. The capacity for genuine human connection that the Stranded Island episode briefly revealed, and that then got put back in the box labeled villain when the episode ended. He is in the wrong category, and the wrong category is the only one available to him in Springfield. This is not unusual in Springfield. The town has a limited number of categories available and tends to maintain people within them with remarkable consistency once the placement has been made. Homer is the hapless worker. Bart is the delinquent. Lisa is the overachiever. Marge is the patient wife. These categories contain partial truths and miss enormous amounts of what the people inside them actually are. Bob's category, the criminal, the villain, the recurring threat, is perhaps the most confining because it is the most negatively defined. A category defined entirely by what a person does wrong leaves no room for what the person does right, and what Bob does right, the intelligence and the music and the occasional genuine human moment, is invisible within the category. He has tried to escape the category. In the political episode, he ran for office under a different flag, attempting to constitute himself as a legitimate civic participant rather than a criminal threat. Springfield thwarted this, partly through the specific mechanisms of the episode and partly through the more general mechanism by which Springfield tends to maintain people in their assigned categories. He went back to the project. The project is the only space the category allows for his full engagement. He continues. The category holds. The opera lives underneath it, patient and beautiful and entirely uncontained by any category Springfield has ever assigned to him. Every time Krusty walks onto the set of his show, he is performing an act of faith. Not religious faith, though Herschel's relationship with his father's faith is woven into the background of everything he does. The faith of a performer who shows up without knowing whether this particular show, this particular day, will be the one where it works or the one where it does not. The faith that what you have given before can be given again. That the connection that the laughter represents is not a finite resource that will eventually be exhausted, but something that replenishes when you show up consistently and bring what you have. Krusty has been performing this faith since the first broadcast. In the decades of shows that the series implies have preceded and will follow the episodes we see, he has walked onto that set on mornings when the faith was strong, and on mornings when the faith was so depleted that the makeup was the only thing holding the performance together. He has done both kinds with the same professional consistency, because the difference between a performer who has lasted 36 years and a performer who has not is not the absence of the bad mornings. It is the showing up on the bad mornings. He shows up. This is what the career has been. This is what the faith has required, and what Herschel, despite the gambling debts and the marriages and the estrangement and the death of his father, has continued to provide. He walks onto the set. The cameras roll. The audience fills the studio, or the laugh track fills the silence where the audience should be, and Krusty looks at it, and he finds somewhere in the combination of professional habit and genuine affection for what the laughter represents, the thing he needs to begin. He begins, the show runs, the laughter comes, and Herschel, for the duration of the laughter, is exactly who he was always supposed to be, the child from the rabbi's household who found out he could make people laugh, and who decided, over the vigorous spiritual and emotional objections of his father, that making people laugh was the thing. The thing. He was right. He is still right. The laughter confirms it every broadcast. The strangling and what it means. The strangling deserves a more honest examination than the show's comedy framing has ever given it. Homer strangles Bart. This is one of the show's most recognizable and most repeated physical gags. The specific animation of Homer's hands going to Bart's throat and Bart's eyes going wide, and the accompanying sound effect, and Marge's expression, and the general comedic rhythm of the sequence. It has been performed so many times across so many episodes that it has become part of the visual grammar of the show, as familiar as the couch gag, or the donut joke, or the Duff beer can. When you pull the gag out of its comedic frame and look at it as a behavior, it is a man repeatedly placing his hands around his son's throat in response to frustration. The show knows this is not something to be defended. The comedy framing is a way of processing something that is genuinely not okay, through the specific mechanism by which animated comedy has always processed the things that are not okay, which is exaggeration and consequence removal, and the restoration of normal in the next scene. Bart is fine. He is always fine. The strangling does not produce harm in the show's universe in the way that the same behavior in a real household would produce harm. But the impulse behind the strangling is real, and the show has occasionally looked at it directly. The Bart Simpson underneath the specific provoking behavior, the child who is genuinely incapable of consistently producing the behavior his father needs him to produce, the child whose relationship with authority and with his own impulses is complicated in ways that Homer's damaged frontal lobe is not well equipped to navigate, is someone who needs patience from his father rather than frustration. Homer knows this in the moments when he can access the knowledge. There are episodes where Homer's love for Bart comes through without the strangling intermediary, where the relationship is depicted in its more honest form, which is the complicated and fierce and genuine love of a man who sees himself in his son and wants for his son the things he was unable to have for himself. These are the episodes people cite when they want to defend Homer. And the citation is fair. The strangling is the comedy version of Homer's damage finding its expression. The love is the thing underneath. Both are real. Neither cancels the other. Bart absorbs both. He has been absorbing both for 36 years. He continues to provoke because the provoking is what he has, the only tool the relationship has given him that reliably produces his father's complete attention. The strangling is Homer being entirely present in Bart's vicinity. An entirely present Homer, even at his worst, is what Bart has been reaching for through 36 years of pranks and provocations and escalating schemes. He wants his father to see him. The strangling is Homer seeing him. It is the wrong kind of seeing, but it is seeing, and in the absence of the right kind, the wrong kind is what Bart has learned to produce. This is the thing the comedy framing allows the show to gesture toward without fully committing to it. The strangling is not a joke about Homer being bad at parenting. It is a gag about a family finding the specific dysfunctional equilibrium that the family's particular combination of damage and love and limited tools has produced. They love each other. They have always loved each other. The strangling is just how the love looks when Homer's frontal lobe is not cooperating and Bart's impulse control has run out, and the situation has arrived at the familiar point where the hands go to the throat and the eyes go wide, and Marge says Homer, and the scene resets and everything is fine. Everything is fine. The family is intact. The love is intact. It is just a little strange around the edges, as everything in Springfield is. Bart's prank calls to Moe's Tavern are one of the show's oldest running jokes and one of its most quietly revealing ongoing observations about both characters. The structure is always the same. Bart calls. He asks for a customer with a name that, when spoken aloud to the bar, produces a humiliating pun. Moe announces the name to the bar. The bar reacts. Moe realizes what has happened. He threatens violence in specific and colorful terms. Bart hangs up. The scene ends. The joke is the pun and the threat and the reset. What sits underneath the joke is the fact that Moe answers. Every time, without exception, across every prank call in 36 years of episodes, Moe picks up the phone. This is not stupidity. Moe is not picking up the phone because he cannot identify the pattern. He knows the pattern. He knows it is Bart. He knows that answering will produce the prank and the humiliation and the specific experience of having been gotten again by a 10-year-old. He picks up anyway. Because the phone ringing in the bar is the bar doing what a bar is supposed to do. The phone ringing is evidence that the bar exists in the world as a place that people call when they need to reach someone inside it. The phone ringing is Springfield reaching into Moe's tavern and making contact. Moe picks up because the alternative, letting it ring, feels more like isolation than the prank call does. The prank call is contact. Even hostile contact, even humiliating contact, even contact designed specifically to produce the experience of being fooled, is contact. Someone is on the other end. Someone knows the number. Someone is paying attention to Moe's tavern at this specific moment of this specific day. He picks up. He announces the name. He realizes. He threatens. He hangs up. And the bar settles back into whatever it was before the phone rang. And Moe goes back to whatever he was doing. And for a moment, there was something happening in the bar besides the ambient quiet of a Springfield afternoon. He will pick up again next time. He always will. The show asks something of its audience that very few shows have asked, and that the audience has been providing, without being formally asked, since December 17, 1989. It asks for participation in the fiction, not the surface fiction, the animated characters and the impossible geography and the cartoon logic. That participation is standard for any animated show and requires no particular investment. The deeper fiction, the one that says these characters matter, that their problems are worth 36 years of weekly attention, that the specific texture of life on Evergreen Terrace, in the shadow of the plant, on the streets of a town that has never been locatable on any real map, is something worth returning to. This is not a self-evident proposition. There are hundreds of animated shows and thousands of live-action shows, and no rational account of why this particular show has been the one that the audience has kept coming back to for longer than any other show in the history of the medium. The quality argument accounts for some of it, but not for 36 seasons. The nostalgia argument accounts for some of it, but not for the new viewers who find the show each year. The cultural ubiquity argument is circular. The show is ubiquitous because it is ubiquitous. The real answer is that the show asks for the participation, and we say yes, and the yes has accumulated over 36 years into something that is no longer simply viewership. It is a relationship. We have a relationship with these characters in the specific way that you have a relationship with something you have returned to consistently across the full span of your adult life. The relationship has history. It has the texture of long familiarity. It has the specific quality of knowing something so well that the knowing is below the level of thought, available before attention is fully engaged. Homer is Homer before you think about him being Homer. The theme plays and you are already in Springfield before the couch gag ends. This is what 36 years of returning produces. A place that is available inside you, that exists in you as a geography of the imagination as real and detailed as any geography of physical memory. The couch, the kitchen, the plant on the hill, the specific color of Springfield's evenings, the specific weight of the family together in a room. We know it. We carry it. It is ours in the way that the things we have returned to consistently become ours. And this is what Springfield asks of us in return for 36 years of being available. That we carry it. That we bring it with us into whatever comes next. That when the world outside gets heavy, we remember that the couch is there, and the family is on it, and Homer is home at 5:30, and Marge is humming in the kitchen, and Bart is on the skateboard, and Lisa is playing into the dark, and Maggie is watching everything with those enormous, patient eyes. That we remember Springfield. We do. We always will. The plant is on the hill. The family is home. The show is not over. It will never be over. That is the whole point. That is what we asked for. That is what Springfield gave us. And what we gave Springfield in return is this: 36 years of attention, of returning, of sitting down on Sunday night and finding out what the family is doing now, of laughing at Homer and worrying about Lisa and rolling our eyes at Bart and trusting that Marge will hold it together and wondering, in the quiet moment before the credits roll, what Maggie is thinking. We gave them our time. They gave us a home. The trade was fair. The show continues. We continue. Springfield continues. Good night. There is one more thing that deserves to be said before this ends, and it is the most obvious thing in Springfield, which is why nobody in Springfield has ever said it. The yellow skin. Every resident of Springfield has yellow skin. Not yellow in the way that people sometimes describe a slightly unusual skin tone as yellowish. Yellow, the specific, saturated, unambiguous yellow of something that has been altered from its original state into something that no longer quite matches what the original state would have produced. The show has depicted non-Springfield characters with natural skin tones across its entire run. The guests, the visitors, the people who arrive from somewhere else and then depart back to wherever they came from, they are rendered with a skin color that corresponds to something a human being could actually have. The Springfield residents are not. They are yellow. This is not the art style in any global sense. The art style does not require yellow skin. The art style knows what natural skin tones look like and renders them on people who are from outside Springfield. The yellow is specific to Springfield. Within the radiation theory, the yellow is the most visible consequence of the contamination, the most constant, the most universal, the most present in every frame of every episode. You cannot watch a single minute of the show without looking at the yellow, and the yellow is the show looking back at you and saying, "This is what the plant did. This is what 30 years of contaminated water and irradiated air and cracked cooling towers with chewing gum patches produces in a human body. This is what it looks like from the outside. This is what Burns's plant has been making, out of the people who had no idea it was making anything out of them at all." Yellow. Homer is yellow. Marge is yellow. Bart and Lisa and Maggie are yellow. The neighbors are yellow. The school principal is yellow. The police chief is yellow. The bartender is yellow. The retired villain in the prison cell is yellow. The whole town is yellow. The town has always been yellow. Nobody has ever asked why. That is Springfield. That is the whole of it, in the color that has been in front of us since December 17th, 1989, in every frame, in every episode, on every face. The answer to every question the theories have been asking is visible in the color of every character's skin. It has never been hidden. It has been displayed, continuously, for 36 years, on the faces of a family going about their lives in a town built on a contaminated hill. The yellow is the confession. It has always been the confession. We just never asked what it was confessing to. Rest now. The family is home. The plant is on the hill. The water is what it is. The sky over Springfield is whatever color the sky over Springfield is tonight. And Homer is on the couch. Marge is humming. Bart has the skateboard somewhere he is not supposed to have it. Lisa is playing. Maggie is watching. This is Springfield. This is what we came for. This is what we always come for. Good night, Springfield. Good night. Springfield does not need you to understand it completely. It only needs you to return, to sit down, to let the theme play, to watch the family land on the couch, and to feel, for the duration of whatever comes next, that you are home. You are home.